A daughter who betrays her own blood is nothing more than a stain to be washed away by the sword.
I would rather bleed for the truth than live in the shadow of your hollow authority.
The Mima Alliance thinks they have conquered the plains, but they have only invited their own extinction.
Hello, everyone. This story is a dark, brutal tale of vengeance and betrayal, centering on the tragic clash between the young warrior Huayan and her father, the ruthless leader Dan Chunhak, as the terrifying Lord of the North, Sol Mudok, descends to claim his bloody retribution. When the lines between family loyalty and survival blur, who will be left standing in the frozen ruins of the Central Plains? If you love epic manhwa breakdowns, make sure to subscribe to The Last Cast. Whose side would you take in this war, the Ice Pavilion or the Mima Alliance? Enjoy the watch.
The warrior scanned his opponents and calculated the remaining time until their next strike. One attacker signaled the others to move, then lunged forward with a jagged blade. The young man raised his sword to meet the incoming steel with a sharp clang. Wounds across his torso leaked crimson onto the frost-covered ground. He remembered the broken deal, the sudden betrayal, and the cold metal entering his back. Despite the pain, he braced his feet to protect the master standing behind him. He shouted for his allies to hold the line for a few moments longer. A taunting laugh echoed from the front, mocking his plea for reinforcements. The young man glanced toward the perimeter and saw the severed heads of his comrades. The leader of the Mima Alliance stood amidst the carnage, his blade dripping with blood. Dan Chunhak stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the exhausted defender. The alliance leader remarked that the power of the Ice Pavilion had proven surprisingly stubborn. The young man retorted that his opponent lacked the courage to face a true master. Nearby soldiers bristled at the insult, their hands tightening around their weapon hilts. A girl stepped onto the wooden porch of the house, her face pale but determined. The young man barked an order for Lady Huayan to retreat immediately. She ignored his warning, insisting that she was perfectly fine and unafraid. Dan Chunhak waved his hand, and his soldiers formed a tight circle around the pair. The alliance leader chided his daughter for running away and falling for these scoundrels. He reached out a gloved hand, offering her a final chance to return home. Huayan asked if her father would spare the lives of her companions if she complied. Dan Chunhak offered no reply, his expression remaining as cold as stone. The girl read the intent in his eyes and realized that mercy was impossible. She whispered a final plea for forgiveness, but kept her distance from his reach. The young man lunged to push her back, but the alliance leader swung his blade. Blood sprayed across the porch as the steel bit deep into the girl's side. The young man screamed for the attacker to stop, his voice cracking in the cold air. Dan Chunhak turned away, heartlessly declaring that he no longer had a daughter. The girl collapsed to the wooden floorboards, her breathing shallow and ragged. The alliance leader claimed she had been corrupted by the influence of the orcs. He ordered his men to finish the slaughter and restore order to the Central Plains. The young man raised his sword again, his movements sluggish from blood loss. He commanded his remaining warriors to fight until their final breath. Huayan drifted into darkness, mourning her inability to keep her promise to her love. Inside the North Sea Palace, a messenger knelt before the throne. He reported that the Ice Pavilion envoys had clashed with the Mima Alliance in battle. The messenger confirmed that every single member of the party had been destroyed. Sol Mudok rose from his throne, his aura turning the air in the room icy. He vowed that the Mima Alliance would be wiped from the face of the earth. He commanded his entire force to mobilize for a march on the Central Plains. On the battlefield, Dan Chunhak fell to his knees as his strength finally failed. The wounded warrior watched his own lifeblood pool around his boots. He looked up to see the Lord of the North Sea standing directly before him. Sol Mudok asked why the man had chosen to murder his own daughter. The dying leader laughed, coughing up blood as he mocked the palace lord. He claimed that any girl who loved a barbarian deserved to die for her sins. Dan Chunhak taunted him, saying the North Sea Lord would never truly possess his heart's desire. A beam of pure, destructive energy pierced through the alliance leader's chest. Dan Chunhak slumped over, his final memory a vision of his daughter as a child. The 6-month blood battle finally ended with the death of the Mima Alliance leader. Master Sol Mudok stood as the undisputed ruler of the Central Plains. He showed no triumph, only a hollow gaze directed toward the pale moon. Back in his private chambers, he sat before a single pot containing a red flower. He drifted into a memory of a day spent writing at his desk. Huayan had run toward him, joy radiating from her face as she held the plant. She told him that the flower of love had finally bloomed in her hands. He had explained that such a flower only blossomed when two people truly loved each other. She had wept with joy, confirming that their love was not one-sided. He had embraced her, telling her that she was the only beauty he cared for. He promised himself that he would fill the entire garden with these flowers for her. He snapped back to the present, his heart heavy with the weight of her absence. Suddenly, the red flower in the pot began to glow with a soft, warm light. He stared in disbelief, wondering how the bloom could return after her death. He summoned his assistant and ordered a search of the entire Central Plains for answers. Days later, the wisest sages of the realm gathered at the Ice Palace. They entered the garden and stopped in awe at the sight of hundreds of glowing flowers. The symbol for love shimmered clearly on every stem in the garden. Sol Mudok stepped from the shadows and asked if they recognized the sight. The elders bowed, trembling as they realized they stood before the ruler of the north. He explained that the flowers had been reborn for no apparent reason. One elder suggested the mystery pointed toward the concept of reincarnation. He proposed that the lady had been reborn somewhere in this vast world. Hope flickered in Sol Mudok's eyes for the first time in years. He demanded to know how he could locate his beloved among the masses. The elder explained that the flower would only shine when the two lovers stood together. He suggested turning the flower into a jewel to carry during his long journey. Sol Mudok set a deadline of 10 days for all preparations to be completed. He would scour every corner of the world to find the soul he had lost. The Lord promised each Mambacha a reward of 100 gold coins. Sol Mudok stared into the distance. He believed he would never see Huayan again. A new spark of hope ignited within his chest. The young man swore he would never abandon this pursuit. He vowed to follow her trail even into the depths of hell. 10 days passed in total silence. The ship cut through the churning waves at full speed. Sol Mudok hovered over the navigation chart. He marked the final destination on the parchment. Hainan remained the only location left to search. 3 years and 5 months had vanished since his journey began. He had scoured every corner of the Central Plains without success. His power had reached the profound level during the long hunt. He had undergone 2 complete metamorphoses in his quest. He remembered a quiet conversation with his beloved. He had questioned her need to depart for the negotiations. Huayan had explained her father's plan to participate. She believed her presence would help her understand his intentions. Sol Mudok had warned her that the meeting smelled of a trap. She had asked him to trust her father just this once. He had agreed, but urged her to flee at the first sign of danger. The girl had prepared to depart for Hainan. She pulled a delicate necklace from her sleeve. She pressed the heirloom into his calloused palm. It was a memento left to her by her mother. She claimed the artifact would always return to its original owner. He had promised the necklace would guide him back to her side. Haiyan had smiled, telling him not to worry. She swore she would never truly leave him behind. Sol Mudok stared at the waves, wishing he had stopped her. A violent storm erupted across the dark sea. Sailors screamed for everyone to grip the railings. They lashed themselves to the ship with thick ropes. Sol Mudok braced himself against the lurching deck. He recognized the sudden tempest as a dark omen. He adopted a steady combat stance. He activated his protective key, the 1,000 kilograms hammer. A shimmering sphere of energy encased his body. The dome shielded him from the crashing saltwater. The ship groaned as waves battered the wooden hull. Unsecured sailors tumbled into the hungry abyss. Women and children shrieked for help from the deck. Sol Mudok knew he had to intervene immediately. A sailor pointed toward a colossal wave rising ahead. The wall of water threatened to swallow the vessel whole. Sol Mudok realized the ship would shatter under the impact. He reached for his unique internal abilities. The air around the ship grew deathly cold. Sailors shivered as frost crept across the floorboards. Sol Mudok focused his spirit on the turbulent ocean. He activated the ice tunnel technique. A massive beam of light pierced the heavy clouds. The necklace around his neck flared with brilliant radiance. The sun broke through the gray sky. Sol Mudok squinted against the sudden brightness. The storm vanished as quickly as it had arrived. Land appeared on the horizon ahead of their course. The young man felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He looked around, confused by his new surroundings. The space felt cramped and dark. He realized he was sitting inside a wooden carriage. He stood up, struggling to orient himself. A moment ago, he had been battling the ocean storm. Panic rose as he heard desperate screams outside. He pushed the carriage door open. People sprinted away from a swarm of giant insects. A girl and a child stood frozen in terror by the path. A man shouted that he would save Sabina and Annie. Sol Mudok drew his blade in a fluid motion. The carriage and the insects were sliced into pieces. The old man stared at the wreckage in shock. Sol Mudok stepped out onto the dirt road. He assumed he had wandered into a forest in the Central Plains. He looked at the strangers and noted their foreign features. He realized he had traveled much further than he expected. Giant flies circled above the panicked survivors. Sol Mudok activated his divine eyeshot. A beam of cold energy froze one of the flies in midair. He could not fathom why a creature would attack humans. He decided that such aggression was unforgivable. He unleashed a barrage of ice crystals. The divine ice shot destroyed all the flies in the vicinity. The eldest man stepped forward and introduced himself as Edmund Rowe. He identified himself as the leader of the Rowe Trading Guild. The man thanked Sol Mudok for saving his people. He asked the name of the mysterious magical swordsman. Sol Mudok did not understand the foreign tongue. He asked if anyone present spoke the language of the Central Plains. Silence met his question. The strangers whispered to each other in an alien dialect. Sol Mudok frowned at the incomprehensible chatter. Another man approached him with a desperate expression. The stranger held out a hand bearing a silver ring. The elder tried to explain the situation with frantic gestures. Sol Mudok stared at the man, his confusion clear. The elder gestured for him to accept the ring. Suddenly, the man began to speak in the language of the Central Plains. Sol Mudok blinked in surprise. The elder confirmed the ring provided instant language interpretation. He explained that it translated the local tongue of the Central Plains. The old man introduced himself once more as Edmund Rowe. He repeated his thanks for the rescue. Sol Mudok replied that he did not know what a magical swordsman was. He stated his name clearly. Edmund looked stunned by the admission. He asked if the hero truly did not understand the term. He explained that a magical swordsman wielded both blade and spell. Sol Mudok asked for a definition of magic. Edmund stared at him, unable to process the question. The hero had just frozen insects with ice, yet he claimed ignorance. Sol Mudok grew impatient with the cryptic conversation. He held out a hand, demanding a quick explanation. The old man flinched, fearing the warrior might lash out. He sat by the campfire, trying to maintain his composure. Sol Mudok asked if magic was common in this part of the Central Plains. Edmund sighed, hoping to de-escalate the situation. He asked where exactly the Central Plains were located. Sol Mudok thought it was absurd that they were lost on their own land. Edmund asked him to clarify his statement. Sol Mudok pointed at the ground beneath their feet. He explained it was strange to be lost while standing on the plains. The merchant shook his head, convinced the young man was insane. Edmund told him they were in a forest near Barhan. He identified Barhan as the capital of the Kingdom of Drake. Sol Mudok stood in silence. He had never heard of a land called Drake. He wondered if the old man was suffering from memory loss. Edmund insisted he was only 50 years old. He expressed concern for the young man's mental state. Sol Mudok gestured toward a boy hiding behind a tree. He suggested they ask the child for the truth. Edmund looked at the boy named Leo. Sol Mudok asked the child if they stood in the Central Plains. The boy stared blankly. Edmund noted that Leo did not understand his language. The merchant held out the ring again. He told the swordsman to put it on and command language interpretation. Edmund silently lamented the waste of such an expensive artifact. He refused to let this stranger treat him like a fool. Sol Mudok placed the ring on his finger. He spoke the command clearly. A strange sensation washed over his mind. He suddenly understood the foreign language perfectly. He marveled at the power of the spell. He turned to the young boy. He asked the child for his name. The boy replied that he was Leo. Sol Mudok asked if this land was the Central Plains or Drake. Leo tilted his head. He asked what the Central Plains were. He repeated that they were on the road to Barhan, capital of Drake. Sol Mudok felt a chill run down his spine. He wondered if the entire group was suffering from dementia. He accused Edmund of coaching the child to lie. The merchant denied the accusation. He offered to let the other guild members confirm the truth. Sol Mudak searched the man's eyes for deceit. He found only genuine confusion and fear. A cold realization settled in his gut. They were not in the Central Plains. He recalled his final moments on the ship. He had been fighting the storm until the very end. He remembered waking up inside the carriage. He looked at his hands, trembling slightly. He wondered if he had been transported through space. Strange, terrifying thoughts flooded his mind. He struggled to piece together the events. He questioned why he had been brought to the kingdom of Drake. An unfamiliar, heavy feeling tightened his chest. The young man stared at the horizon, searching for answers. Sol Mudak stood still, his chest rising and falling from the strange sensation. Edmund Rowe watched him closely, waiting for a response. The young man examined his own palms, noting the unfamiliar energy humming beneath his skin. This power felt entirely different from the chi of the Central Plains. A sudden, sharp surge of warmth flared inside his chest once more. Sol Mudak gasped aloud, his eyes flashing with an unnatural, brilliant light. The volume of energy swirling within his dantian had doubled in a single instant. He searched the horizon, wondering why he remained trapped in this foreign land. The hero desperately needed to locate Hayun before anything else. He pulled the small, glowing necklace from his robes. Hayun had once promised this trinket would guide him back to her. He concluded that his arrival here was no accident, but a pull toward his beloved. Edmund stepped forward, his expression filled with growing curiosity. He asked the mysterious swordsman about his sudden, strange behavior. Sol Mudak turned to the merchant, his face composed once more. He explained that he had urgent business to attend to and must depart soon. The hero paused, needing one final piece of information. He gestured toward the boy named Leo, who huddled near the carriage. Sol Mudak asked if it were true that this land was called Drake. Edmund bowed his head, confirming the name of the kingdom. He pointed toward a distant road, promising they would reach the capital, Barhan, by nightfall. Sol Mudak asked for the exact location of the city. Leo laughed, clearly surprised by the stranger's lack of basic knowledge. The boy remarked that he had heard of mountain recluses, but never met one. Sol Mudak nodded, maintaining his calm demeanor. He confirmed that he had trained in the mountains and only emerged today. He admitted he knew nothing of the world's current state. The names of Drake and Barhan remained completely alien to his ears. Smoodok suggested that perhaps they were traveling through the land of the Western barbarians. A younger child skipped toward them, clutching a wooden toy. The boy asked if the magical swordsman could teach him a secret technique. Sol Mudak leaned down, asking the child for his name. The boy grinned, identifying himself as Luffy. Edmund watched the interaction with wide eyes, stunned by the hero's sudden change in tone. The merchant realized he could never predict the young man's next move. Sol Mudak began to study the surrounding environment with intense focus. He tested the local language, finding it surprisingly easy to grasp. Conversing with Luffy, he slowly accepted a terrifying truth. This was not the land of the Western barbarians. He held a local map in his hands, tracing the strange, jagged borders. The terrain appeared completely alien to his trained eye. The written characters on the parchment differed entirely from those of his home. He learned of creatures he had only seen in ancient, dusty myths. Elves, gnomes, and beastmen walked the earth in this new realm. Luffy spoke of dragons, massive winged lizards that ruled the skies. The boy explained that warp magic required a wizard of the 5th circle or higher. Luffy drew a circle in the dirt, demonstrating how a mage might travel instantly. Sol Mudak watched the simple drawing, realizing how little he knew of this world's laws. He looked up toward the horizon, his breath catching in his throat. 3 distinct moons hung in the darkening sky above. He stood in a world that defied everything he knew of the Central Plains. He wondered if Hayun truly possessed the power to summon him across such a void. A sharp, desperate scream pierced the quiet of the camp. Sol Mudak spun around, his hand instinctively hovering near his blade. He found Sabina standing near the carriage, holding a rusted knife. She clutched a child against her chest, her eyes wide with terror. She shouted for the others to stay back, her voice trembling. Sol Mudak stepped forward, his posture open and non-threatening. He urged Sabina to lower the weapon, promising her safety in the capital. He mentioned the healing mages in Barhan who could surely help. Sabina laughed bitterly, shaking her head at his naivety. She cried out that healing mages were rare and demanded a fortune for their services. She pointed to the child, revealing the eggs of killer beetles lodged near her heart. The mother explained that the larvae would soon hatch and tear the girl apart. Sabina raised the blade higher, declaring she would rather die than watch that horror. Sol Mudok reached out, his voice steady and commanding. He promised he would cure them both if she simply dropped the knife. Sabina stared at him, her grip on the weapon loosening. She dropped the steel into the dirt, weeping as she collapsed. Sol Mudok stepped closer, signaling for her to sit upon the grass. He told her the treatment must begin immediately to be effective. Edmund approached with caution, asking if the warrior truly understood healing arts. Sol Mudok replied that he knew nothing of magic, only ancient techniques from his home. He asked the group to remain silent and back away. The merchant barked an order, and the caravan members shuffled backward. Sol Mudok knelt before Sabina and the young girl, Annie. He told them to close their eyes and breathe deeply. He tapped into his unique internal energy, letting it flow through his fingertips. A soft, golden glow enveloped the two patients. He scanned their bodies, locating the tiny, pulsating eggs near their hearts. He breathed a sigh of relief, noting the eggs had not yet hatched. He focused his intent, carefully burning the parasites away without harming the delicate hearts. Sabina and Annie gasped as a wave of intense heat washed over them. They began to breathe rhythmically, their faces losing their sickly pale tint. Sol Mudok withdrew his hands, the glow fading into the night air. He told them the procedure was finished and the eggs were destroyed. Sabina blinked, unable to grasp the miracle she had just witnessed. Edmund rushed over, asking if the pair was truly safe. Leo peeked from behind a wagon, hoping for a confirmation. Sol Mudok nodded, assuring them there would be no side effects. Annie opened her eyes and bowed, whispering her thanks to the swordsman. Sabina wept with relief, calling him their savior. The entire group gathered around, bowing low in gratitude. Sol Mudok walked away, finding a quiet spot beneath a large tree. He looked up at the three moons, exhausted by the day's events. He clutched the crystal pendant, missing Hayun more than ever. He prayed they would meet again soon in this strange new world. The next morning, the caravan reached the massive gates of the capital. The city walls loomed ahead, constructed from dark, reinforced stone. Edmund fanned himself, complaining about the brutal, sweltering heat. The other guild members wiped sweat from their brows, nodding in agreement. Luffy ran to the hero, offering a flask of water. Sol Mudok accepted the gift, taking a long, thirsty drink. He grimaced, finding the water as warm as the air itself. He focused his energy, releasing a faint mist of cold air into the flask. The metal container frosted over instantly, chilling the contents. Luffy watched in awe, asking if the hero was feeling better. Sol Mudok admitted the cool water was a welcome relief. He handed the flask back, watching the boy take a sip. Luffy's eyes widened, his face lighting up with pure delight. He asked if the hero would be willing to freeze his other flasks as well. Sol Mudok smiled, remembering how much the child had helped him. He touched the remaining bottles, turning the water into ice. Soon, the rest of the guild members crowded around the hero. They held out their own containers, pleading for a taste of the cold drink. Sol Mudok sighed, realizing his simple gesture had created a new problem. Edmund pushed through the crowd, demanding to know the source of the commotion. Luffy explained that the magical swordsman had turned their water into ice. The merchant knelt before Sol Mudok, pleading for a share of the cold water. The hero complied, wanting to maintain his position within the guild. He needed their protection and local knowledge to navigate this city. Edmund drank deeply, sighing as the cold quenched his exhaustion. He thanked the hero, asking how he had achieved such a feat. Sol Mudok looked confused, wondering why they made such a fuss. Edmund insisted the water tasted better than any ice cream in the kingdom. He explained that local mages usually collected moisture from the air to make ice. The merchant noted that such magic always left behind bitter mana impurities. He praised the hero, saying this water was pure and truly delicious. Sol Mudok realized that the magic of this world was fundamentally flawed. He looked at his hands, sensing the latent potential of his own energy. The carriage wheels creaked as they rolled through the city gates. He saw bustling markets and strange, colorful architecture everywhere he looked. He decided that for now he would stay with these people. He would learn the secrets of this place, one step at a time. He adjusted his robes, stepping into the heart of the capital. His journey in this new world had only just begun. The merchant explained that most wizards struggled to produce truly pure ice. Sol Mudok observed the crystalline blocks stacked high within the buckets. The ice shimmered with an unnatural clarity, catching the dim light of the storage room. He realized the merchant's sudden popularity stemmed entirely from this simple, magical refinement. Sol Mudok felt a flicker of pity for the locals who were so easily impressed. He decided to create another batch, finding the task trivial and oddly relaxing. Edmund Rowe approached him with a glint of ambition in his tired eyes. The merchant proposed a formal business partnership to revive his struggling trade guild. Days passed in a blur of repetitive, rhythmic labor. Charles barked orders at the workers, directing them to handle the precious cargo with care. Sol Mudok stood at the end of the production line, freezing fresh water into solid blocks. The freezing process continued without pause, filling every available container. Sol Mudok asked if the merchant truly believed ice could save a crumbling trade empire. Edmund nodded firmly, insisting that quality products would always find a hungry market. The young hero noted the merchant's ulterior motives, but saw no trace of malice. He demanded a 70% cut of the profits as his share of the labor. Edmund balked at the high price, citing the costs of wagons, guards, and transport mages. They eventually settled on a 60-40 split after a brief, tense negotiation. The merchant produced a contract, his hands trembling slightly with hope. Sol Mudok signed the document, viewing it as a convenient way to study the city's power structures. A frantic Charles burst into the room, gasping for air. He pointed toward the entrance, urging the merchant to see the scene unfolding outside. A massive, unruly crowd had gathered before the guild gates. They shouted demands, waving coins and pushing against the wooden barriers. Edmund Rowe stepped outside, his face pale at the sight of the chaotic mob. He commanded the buyers to form an orderly queue. The crowd ignored him, their voices rising in a deafening, discordant roar. A sharp, authoritative voice echoed inside every head in the courtyard. Sol Mudok appeared in the doorway, his presence silencing the commotion instantly. He warned the visitors that further noise would result in their immediate expulsion. Edmund clarified that the guild only dealt in wholesale, turning away individual retail buyers. A young woman at the front of the crowd protested, but withered under the swordsman's cold stare. Sol Mudok waved a hand, dismissing the commoners with a flick of his wrist. Wholesale representatives from the powerful Mage and Arista families stepped forward. Benjamin, the butler of a prominent slave-trading house, watched the display with narrowed eyes. Edmund beamed, realizing his fortune had finally begun to turn. He urged Sol Mudok to take a well-deserved rest while he managed the logistics. The young hero retreated to his room, seeking a moment of quiet. Edmund watched him leave, his thoughts drifting to his fallen family and their stolen honor. He vowed to use the guild's rising wealth to strike back at the wicked Duke Icarus. Sol Mudok collapsed onto his bed, exhaustion finally claiming his limbs. A soft knock interrupted his rest, followed by the sound of the door creaking open. Sabina entered the room, holding a chilled plate of fruit-infused ice. The hero sat up, recognizing the sweet, frozen treat she had invented. He took a bite, savoring the cold, juicy texture that felt like a luxury. He thanked the girl, who smiled shyly before retreating from the room. The hero finished the bowl quickly, finding the serving size far too small. He stepped outside, intending to fetch more, but halted at the sound of shouting. A group of arrogant young aristocrats had cornered Sabina near the gate. One nobleman sneered, demanding to know why a common girl dared to order them around. He threatened her with consequences if the next batch of ice proved unsatisfactory. Sabina stood her ground, declaring that the guild did not serve hooligans. The nobleman drew his sword, his face twisted in a mask of insulted pride. His companions laughed, mocking the girl's defiance against their noble status. Sol Mudok leaned against a pillar, watching the confrontation with detached interest. Sabina's heart pounded, but she kept her gaze fixed on the aggressive visitor. She reminded them of the guild's strict rules regarding order and decorum. The nobleman lunged forward, his blade flashing in the sunlight. His friend grabbed his arm, whispering a warning to keep his temper in check. The attacker glared at Sabina, his eyes filled with a chilling, predatory hunger. Edmund rushed into the fray, his voice booming with unexpected authority. He repeated that the guild refused to serve the rowdy group. The leader of the aristocrats recognized the merchant, his grin widening into a cruel smirk. He taunted Edmund, mocking the pathetic state of the disgraced row trade guild. The nobleman realized the merchant's identity and prepared to strike him down. He claimed that insulting a nobleman was a crime, punishable by immediate execution. Edmund closed his eyes, bracing for the final blow that would end his quest for revenge. A blur of motion cut through the air, stopping the blade inches from the merchant's throat. Sol Mudok held the nobleman's wrist, his grip like iron. The hero pushed the attacker aside, sending him stumbling into the dirt. The aristocrat scrambled to his feet, his face crimson with fury. He shrieked, asking if the commoner truly had a death wish. Sol Mudok sighed, annoyed that his snack break had been ruined by such trivial people. He looked at the group, deciding it was time to teach them a lesson in manners. Justin drew his steel blade and lunged forward with a piercing shout. He vowed that both the guild leader and the stranger would meet their end today. The nobleman's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Sol Mudok shifted his weight, sidestepping the desperate strike with fluid grace. He laughed softly, mocking the lack of precision in the attacker's frantic movements. The hero noted that the young man possessed a certain raw talent. Still, the sword swings failed to come within inches of his shifting frame. Sol Mudok remarked that true harmony was born from reason, not unchecked aggression. He observed that if these aristocrats represented the pinnacle of society, then principles were dead. The swordsman declared he would personally correct the young man's atrocious manners. Justin shrieked, insulted that a commoner dared to lecture a noble on behavior. Sol Mudok countered that status meant nothing when basic discipline was lacking. The nobleman missed his mark once again, his momentum carrying him past his target. The hero recalled the brutal, unforgiving politics of the distant Central Plains. He had grown soft, distracted by his lingering attachment to the search for Huan. The cold reality remained that only the strongest souls survived the test of time. Sol Mudok gathered his inner energy and unleashed a concentrated burst of formless chi. The invisible force manifested as a jagged arrow, striking Justin's wrist with surgical precision. A clean hole appeared in the nobleman's hand, spurting a spray of bright red blood. Justin dropped his weapon, crashing to his knees as he clutched his mangled limb. He howled in agony, his face turning pale against the dusty ground. Edmund Rowe watched the scene in shock, eyes wide at the display of supernatural power. Sol Mudok stepped toward the cowering group, his shadow looming over them. The remaining youths shouted for him to stop, threatening him with dire consequences. The hero ignored their pleas, calmly telling the injured man to remain on the floor. Justin struggled to his feet, ignoring his colleagues' attempts to restrain him. He pushed his companion aside, his eyes burning with a mixture of pain and defiance. Sol Mudok felt a flicker of curiosity about the boy's stubborn endurance. He stepped forward, unarmed, and effortlessly swatted the nobleman aside with one hand. The youth flew backward, landing hard in the dirt with a bone-jarring thud. The armed companions trembled, their weapons shaking in their grip as fear took hold. One youth grabbed Justin, begging him to cease this suicidal display of pride. Justin stared at his wounded hand, watching as the hole began to knit itself shut. The flesh pulsed and retracted, the injury shrinking rapidly before their very eyes. Charles gasped in disbelief, unable to process the sight of such rapid recovery. Sol Mudok frowned, surprised that the boy survived even a single strike. He concluded that Justin was far weaker than his initial posturing had suggested. The hero hesitated, questioning if he should end the confrontation here and now. He knew nothing of the laws in this world and wished to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Justin spat on the ground, demanding to know the identity of his mysterious assailant. He asked how this stranger dared to treat a member of the Vanakaras house so poorly. Sol Mudok looked at the boy and labeled him a hopeless, deluded fool. The nobleman was clearly possessed by a hollow, destructive form of pride. The companions brandished their weapons, swearing that the stranger would pay for his mockery. Sol Mudok spotted a discarded wooden stick lying in the dirt nearby. He picked it up, noting that the object felt like a relic from the void. His eyes flared with a strange, internal light as he gripped the wood. Justin stared, convinced he was witnessing the technique of a legendary magical swordsman. Sol Mudok channeled his sword energy into the simple branch, turning it into a lethal weapon. The hero announced that this would serve as the sword of trial for the day. The terrified hooligans collapsed to their knees, paralyzed by the sudden surge of power. Sol Mudok swung his arm, declaring that a baton was the best medicine for their sickness. He rained blows upon the group, the stick whistling through the air with every strike. The victims groveled in the dirt, begging for mercy and promising to change their ways. Sol Mudok leaned down, cupping an ear, and demanding they repeat their promises louder. Justin choked out an apology, his voice cracking with humiliation and defeat. He vowed he would never repeat the mistakes he had made this afternoon. Sol Mudok tossed the stick aside, satisfied that the club had effectively taught its lesson. He warned the youths to walk carefully if they wished to keep their lives. Edmund and Charles stared at the hero, stunned by the display of martial authority. They bowed their heads, offering their gratitude to the enigmatic swordsman. Inside the royal palace, the king's advisors gathered to discuss the shifting tides of power. Count Slave stepped forward, presenting a report from a subordinate stationed in the Kingdom of Serbia. King Tomalov III motioned for the man to continue his update. The Count explained that Serbia had successfully reclaimed the barren Blackstone region in the north. He added rumors that the Kingdom of Hyzan planned to develop lands beyond the Sahara Desert. Duke Sergio Vonicaris interjected, claiming the desert was too dangerous due to swarms of monsters. He asked if the kingdom was taking any specific measures to address the threat. The Count admitted uncertainty but suspected they were attempting to lure Inos to their side. King Tomalov III leaned forward, his expression shifting into one of genuine surprise. Count Kren asked if they were truly discussing Inos, one of the 10 legendary swordmasters. The group murmured, noting that the master had always refused coin and fame alike. He was known to wander the continent, never tethering himself to a single throne. Count Slave questioned why such a man would choose to align with the Kingdom of Hyzan. Count Kren wondered if the motivation was love rather than material wealth. The Count revealed that Enos was rumored to be courting Princess Daphrin of Hyzan. The advisors whispered, shocked that King Lier II would trade his own sister for loyalty. The King of Snakes was clearly making his move to consolidate power. The Kingdom of Hyzan now effectively possessed 2 of the continent's greatest swordmasters. They stood poised to expand their borders beyond the limits set by Lier III. To the east, the desert nation of Hyzan grew more aggressive by the day. In the south, the trading hub of Serbia began to flourish with new resources. Across the Western Sea, the Zaya Empire continued to hoard land and influence. King Tomalov III surveyed his council, asking for their tactical opinions on the crisis. Duke Icarus suggested that they must also expand their territory to survive the shift. The king sighed, pointing out that their borders had no room for further growth. He asked if the Duke proposed an invasion of the frozen lands beyond the Lazar Mountains. Duke Icarus nodded, insisting they had no other viable options left. The king looked at the map, knowing the northern wastes were impossible to cultivate. Even if conquered, the land remained a frozen tomb, devoid of any real strategic value. He understood that staying out of the north meant being pushed out of the continental struggle. Someone would eventually be forced to head north to resolve the issue of expansion. The king ended the meeting, dismissing his lords to reflect on the heavy decision. Duke Icarus watched them leave, sensing that the count and the king were hiding secrets. In the privacy of the royal chambers, King Tomalov III questioned the count about the duke. He asked if the man had made any recent errors in judgment. The count shook his head, confirming the duke's record remained technically clean. The king noted that the duke was simply acting out of his usual selfish greed. For a decade, the duke had exiled all his political rivals to the northern wastes. The count took the blame, but the king refused to let him shoulder the burden. He trusted the count above all other men in his court. The king shifted the subject to the rumors of a sweet treat appearing in the capital. He asked what the count knew about the ice cream produced by the Roe Trade Guild. The count confirmed it was a unique product, known as candy for its intense sweetness. The king inquired how long the guild had been operating their shop. The count suggested that His Majesty should pay a surprise visit to see for himself. The king smiled, noting that the count always knew exactly how to please him. At the guild, a group of children crowded around the hero, begging for lessons. They demanded to be taught the secrets of magic to protect their home. Luffy stepped forward, promising he would work harder than anyone else. Sol Mudok explained that his techniques were martial arts, not arcane magic. He called his style the Divine Ice Shot, a craft of the North. The hero admitted he could not teach them magic he did not possess himself. Sabina spoke up, declaring that they were more than happy to learn martial arts instead. The other children cheered, their eyes wide with determination and hope. Sol Mudok remembered his own childhood, fueled by the same burning desire to grow strong. He hesitated, knowing he needed to find Huan before his time ran out. Yet, these children had been his first allies in this strange new world. He could not teach them the forbidden arts of the North Sea, but he could adapt. Sol Mudok told them to return tomorrow at the same hour for their first lesson. The children ran off, leaving the hero alone with his thoughts in the quiet office. He looked out the window, his mind drifting back to the burden of his teacher. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the rhythmic clanking of heavy iron armor. He groaned, realizing that even a moment of peace was impossible to find here. The Count wondered if his guards could hold the line until reinforcements arrived. The attack was a coordinated strike aimed directly at the king and his loyal advisor. An unknown figure, hidden behind an undead mask, lunged toward the monarch. The assassin exhaled a torrent of dragon-like fire, engulfing the royal chamber. A massive explosion rocked the palace walls, turning the air into a furnace. The king shouted for the Count to take cover as the roof began to collapse. The slave approached the king and knelt on the cold stone floor. The slave reported that the danger had passed. The king frowned, his eyes fixed on the Count's bleeding hand. The Count waved a dismissive hand, claiming the wound was trivial. Cotton watched from the shadows, misidentifying the Count as a powerful wizard. The masked assassins tightened their grips on their blood-stained blades. One attacker declared that no witness should remain alive tonight. He lunged forward, eager to snap the necks of the noblemen. The Count spun around, his own blade meeting the assassin's steel with a sharp clang. Cotton questioned the cruel fate that brought these villains to the royal chamber. The attacker sneered, stating that dead men had no need for answers. The Count watched as more masked figures emerged from the shadows. He realized the attackers were using magic to mask their true numbers. The Count stepped in front of the king, shielding him from the encroaching blades. The villains channeled their energy, their mouths glowing with a searing heat. Fire erupted from their throats, filling the room with a suffocating orange glow. The slave shouted for the guards to form a defensive line around His Highness. The attackers laughed, claiming that salvation was far beyond the reach of the king's men. Suddenly, a gust of wind extinguished the flames before they could touch the royals. One of the masked men stumbled back, his hood falling to reveal a terrified face. Sol Mudok stood perched on a thick tree branch overlooking the chaos. The protagonist dropped into the room, landing silently behind the lead assassin. He remarked that he had only come outside to admire the moonlight. Sol Mudok struck the man, sending him crashing into the stone wall. He sighed, telling the villains to hurry because his ice cream was starting to melt. The lead attacker steadied himself, his eyes widening at the young man's casual tone. He sensed that this stranger possessed a power far beyond that of a normal guard. The villain ordered his comrades to ignore the boy and finish the king. Sol Mudok glanced at the assassin's sword, unimpressed by the craftsmanship. He decided to test the weapon against his own North Sea techniques. The protagonist invited the assassin to attack with everything he had. The villain roared in anger, charging forward with his blade held high. Sol Mudok dodged the strike with a simple, fluid step to the side. The criminal missed, his momentum carrying him into the path of the hero's counterattack. A single strike sent the attacker flying across the room into a pile of rubble. The king watched in awe, wondering who this mysterious savior could be. The Count signaled for the king to retreat further into the safe zone. The king stared at the young man, seeing a new hope for his crumbling kingdom. An assassin shouted to Captain Morian that they were fighting a master swordsman. Sol Mudok's expression darkened as he looked at his ruined ice cream. He muttered that the scoundrels had truly pushed him too far this time. The masked criminals hesitated, confused by the boy's obsession with a frozen treat. Sol Mudok announced that he would count to 3 before ending the fight. He warned them that he could not guarantee the survival of anyone left standing. The villains charged from all sides, desperate to overwhelm their opponent. Sol Mudok calmly counted to 3 as the blades closed in around him. He raised a hand, and a shimmering barrier of spirit energy erupted around him. The king and the count stared in disbelief at the impenetrable glowing shield. Sol Mudok dropped the barrier, satisfied that he had exacted his petty revenge. He turned his back on the defeated assassins and walked toward the exit. The king ordered the count to locate the mysterious boy within the hour. Guild leader Edmund Rowe sat in his office, stunned by the reports from his assistants. He learned that a group of children had begun training in the arts of magic. Edmund questioned how such young children could master the complex flows of arcane power. He wondered if the legendary magic swordsman was personally training them. The assistant nodded, confirming the rumors circulating among the merchant families. Edmund realized the potential for his guild if they could secure such a talent. He decided that the guild's future might be brighter than he had ever imagined. Edmund approached Sol Mudok, bowing slightly to show his respect. Sol Mudok looked at the guild leader, waiting for the man to speak his mind. Edmund admitted he knew the hero was teaching the children the secrets of magic. The protagonist understood that the guild's gossip mill was already turning. Edmund expressed his deep gratitude, unsure how to repay such a monumental service. Henry interrupted the conversation, announcing that a visitor was waiting at the door. Sol Mudok looked up to see a young man weeping uncontrollably in the hallway. He told the boy to leave, having no patience for the royal drama. The visitor knelt and grabbed the hero's leg, begging for mercy. He claimed the king had ordered him to bring the hero to the palace today. Sol Mudok shook him off, stating that he did not care for royal decrees. Edmund watched the scene, shocked that the man was the king's own chamberlain. The chamberlain continued to sob, pleading for the hero to accept the invitation. Sol Mudok turned away, telling the boy to stop wasting his precious time. The protagonist stood alone, wondering if this was the path to finding Huan. He noticed his crystal pendant beginning to pulse with a faint rhythmic light. He recalled the last 3 years spent conquering the lands north of the river. He knew the Central Plains would soon fall under their growing influence. Negotiating with the cunning masters of Mima had proven to be a futile effort. He remembered his companion saying that power was the only language the North Sea understood. Sol Mudok agreed that if they refused to cooperate, they would have to be crushed. He thought of the day he first met Huan, the woman of his destiny. He tried to push the memories away, focusing on the need for a tactical plan. The children cheered as they saw their teacher approaching the training grounds. Sol Mudok took a deep breath, trying to organize his chaotic thoughts. In the palace, the king sat in his chair, frustrated by the latest failure. The chamberlain apologized, promising to return the next day to try again. The king asked how many times the hero had already rejected their summons. A servant entered, announcing that Princess Eskil requested an urgent audience. The king nodded, allowing his daughter to enter the royal chambers. The princess entered, noticing the chamberlain's tear-stained face and hunched posture. She asked her father if something was wrong, her voice full of worry. The king reassured her that he was physically unharmed and perfectly safe. The princess asked why the hero had refused to come to the palace. The king explained that the young man remained indifferent to all royal requests. Eskil decided that this mysterious stranger was truly a remarkable individual. She mentioned that the ice cream from the Roe Guild was now the capital's favorite treat. The king replied that he had tasted the sweets and found them delicious. He revealed that the creator of the ice cream was the same man who saved his life. The princess remembered the taste, feeling a strange connection to the unknown creator. She looked out the window, seeing children enjoying their treats in the summer sun. She decided that she would find a way to meet this man herself. Sol Mudok watched his students, noting their progress after only a few weeks. They were already learning to radiate and control their own internal energy. He knew the high concentration of spirit energy in this region made training easier. He told them to stop for now, as they had mastered the basics of mana flow. The chamberlain returned to the training grounds, accompanied by a figure in a hood. Sol Mudok sighed, wondering why the man refused to leave him in peace. He paused as his necklace began to emit an intense, blinding light. The girl lowered her hood, revealing a face that sent a shock through his heart. She introduced herself as Eskil, the princess of the kingdom of Drake. Sol Mudok stood frozen, realizing she looked exactly like his lost Huan. He walked with the princess to a nearby cafe to speak in private. Eskil thanked him for saving her father's life during the recent attack. She explained that the king only wanted to offer his formal gratitude at the palace. The girl looked at him with curious eyes, asking why he was so hesitant to visit. The princess observed the young man, her eyes lingering on his stoic expression. She noted that he had declined her previous invitations with cold, unwavering consistency. Sol Mudok watched her, detecting the familiar spirit of his lost Huan in her gaze. He bowed his head, acknowledging the gravity of her request. He agreed to appear at the palace at the appointed hour the following morning. Eskol confirmed the arrangement, her face brightening with a subtle, relieved smile. She rose from her seat, signaling the conclusion of their brief meeting. Sol Mudok watched her depart, his mind racing with the implications of his goal. He needed to bridge the massive gap between a commoner and the royal heir. He recalled the tragic end of Huayang's relationship with his father. He determined that he would not repeat those same mistakes again. He turned toward Edmund, his eyes conveying a silent, desperate need for guidance. The guild leader stared at him, stunned by the hero's bold declaration of intent. Sol Mudok stated plainly that he intended to marry Princess Eskol. Edmund gasped, convinced that the young man had finally lost his senses. He explained that Eskol was the only child of the late Queen Swan. She stood as the sole legitimate heir to the throne of the kingdom. The guild leader reminded him that such a match required royal blood. He pointed out that an unknown foreigner without status possessed no such claim. Sol Mudok asked what steps he could take to alter his current standing. Edmund sighed, noting that the hero would need to earn immense fame first. He began pulling heavy tomes from his shelves, piling them onto the desk. He explained that these books contained the necessary basics of royal etiquette. Sol Mudok watched the guild leader channel his energy into the task of instruction. He realized that Edmund feared the guild would suffer if he acted rashly. The training began that same evening under the flickering light of the hearth. Edmund barked orders, demanding that the hero maintain a perfect, upright posture. Lectures continued through the night and into the following day. The protagonist swapped his simple tunic for stiff, formal court garments. He practiced his bows until his muscles burned from the repetitive strain. The royal chamber guards announced the arrival of the mysterious magical swordsman. Sol Mudok entered the throne room, finding the atmosphere thick with tension. He noticed the disgruntled faces of the nobles seated along the walls. Eskol stood nearby, looking visibly agitated by the unexpected gathering of critics. The young man glanced at Justin, remembering their recent heated confrontation. Justin muttered a curse, his face flushing with visible, simmering rage. Duke Icarus stepped forward, gesturing sharply for his son to remain silent. He hissed that Justin should avoid making a fool of himself before the king. Justin bowed his head, though his hands remained clenched into tight fists. King Tomaloff III watched the proceedings, his expression unreadable and stern. He asked what finally prompted the hero to accept his repeated summons. Sol Mudok explained that his guild business had finally reached a manageable pace. He noted that the high demand for ice left him with little free time. He bowed, stating that he was honored to finally accept the royal invitation. The king chuckled, acknowledging that the hero's ice cream had become quite popular. He asked the young man to provide his true name for the royal record. Sol Mudok replied that he possessed no formal name, answering only to his title. Eskol suggested that her father bestow a name upon him himself. She reminded the king that this man had personally saved his life. Duke Icarus nodded in agreement, praising the princess for her excellent suggestion. The king declared that he could not ignore such a debt of gratitude. He commanded the magical swordsman to step forward and kneel before the throne. Sol Mudok knelt, his pride stinging, yet he focused on his ultimate goal. The king announced that he was granting the title of Baron to his savior. He bestowed the name Blizzard upon him, representing the fury of the storm. Sol Mudok noted that the name carried weight within the kingdom of Drake. The king invited the new Baron Blizzard to rise and stand before the court. He reiterated his thanks, promising that his life was forever tied to this act. Duke Icarus proposed that a newly titled Baron required an estate of his own. The king agreed, though he paused to consult the map on the table. The duke suggested the northern Icelands as a suitable territory for the hero. He claimed that the region desperately required a capable lord to oversee it. Sol Mudok realized that the duke intended to exile him to the frozen wastes. He caught the glint of malice in the duke's eyes, hidden behind a polite veneer. Eskol looked at the map, her expression darkening as she realized the danger. She knew the northern lands were a harsh, unforgiving continent of ice. The protagonist decided to accept the land, seeing it as a path to power. He would use the challenge to forge a reputation that no noble could ignore. Edmund pulled him aside, warning him of the dangers of the northern climate. He spoke of unstable mana, fierce blizzards, and sudden, deadly avalanches. Sol Mudok dismissed the concerns, claiming his health was more than sufficient. Edmund asked if the hero believed he was a member of the legendary Yeti clan. He explained that the Yetis were giants, immune to the most brutal cold. He noted that one northern inhabitant could match 100 southern soldiers in strength. Sol Mudok found the prospect of mastering such a region incredibly promising. He returned to his quarters, finding his young students waiting at the door. They clung to his robes, begging him not to leave them behind. Sabina asked who would teach them magic if their mentor traveled north. The children sobbed, their voices echoing through the quiet guild hall. Sol Mudok looked at them, feeling the weight of his responsibility as a teacher. He noticed Eskol standing in the shadows, waiting for the children to disperse. He instructed his students to return to their quarters for the evening. The children lingered, their eyes pleading for a final change of heart. Sabina stepped forward, holding a small, hand-woven charm toward the hero. She asked him to listen to their request before he made his final choice. The protagonist sighed, realizing that his journey would be far more complex than expected. The children scampered away from the guild hall with joyful shouts. Princess Aesel watched the retreating group with a faint, amused smile. She remarked that the Baron possessed remarkably energetic students. The young man replied that they were quite a rebellious bunch. Baron Blizzard turned his gaze back toward the princess. He asked if she was finally feeling better after their long conversation. Aesel hung her head and offered a soft, sincere apology. She admitted that she had asked her father for the title on a whim. The princess realized with regret that her idea forced the Baron toward the northern lands. The protagonist noted the striking similarity between Aesel and Huan. He recalled the moment Huan blamed herself for the incident with Dan Chunhawk. Baron Blizzard stated that he would have never gone north without this new title. Princess Aesel repeated her apology, her eyes filled with genuine remorse. The protagonist found the girl's earnest expression surprisingly cute. Baron Blizzard turned away, signaling that his time for departure had arrived. The princess asked how she could possibly calm the Baron's spirit before he left. The young man replied that a good luck charm might suffice. Aesel blinked in confusion, wondering what such a charm entailed. Baron Blizzard explained that it was a kiss filled with sincere concern. The princess jumped backward, her face flushing a deep, vibrant crimson. The young man decided that he had spoken far too bluntly. He turned to leave, needing to finalize his preparations for the long journey. Baron Blizzard asked the princess to simply forget his previous comment. Aesel scowled, her anger rising at his abrupt change in demeanor. She questioned what kind of person walked away after making such a bold request. The girl commanded the young man to stop in his tracks. The protagonist turned around, wondering if he had committed a social blunder. He mused that her behavior felt strangely familiar to his own past experiences. The young man stated that he did not wish to impose on her comfort. He suggested that they should just ignore the entire awkward exchange. The girl reached out and grabbed the fabric of his formal attire. She pulled the young man forward with a sudden, decisive motion. Princess Aesel pressed her lips against the surprised Baron's mouth. She pulled away, covered her face with her hood, and sprinted into the distance. The confused Baron Blizzard stood frozen in the middle of the hall. He thought that he must return to the capital only after achieving true success. A crystal hanging on his chest glowed with a sudden, brilliant light. The princess continued to run, hiding her shy face from the world. Rumors spread like wildfire throughout the distant northern city of Carolyn. People whispered that a new lord was finally arriving to claim his estate. They claimed he had saved the king's life from an unseen threat. For this heroic deed, he was granted a prestigious title and vast lands. Patrons at the local tavern discussed the legend of his strength. They said he single-handedly defeated 100 enemies in a single instant. One man claimed the lord was a sixth circle wizard of immense power. His companion added that the man possessed swordsmanship equal to a master. A skeptic laughed, wondering why such a remarkable man would come to this frozen wasteland. One patron suggested that the lord had surely fallen out of favor with Duke Icarus. Another man noted that these were merely unverified rumors. He predicted that the newcomer would run away as soon as he felt true fear. In the snowy forest, two hunters searched for a rare wyvern. The woman, Luna, let out a sharp, piercing scream. A massive wyvern burst from the trees and charged at the pair. Luna fell into the deep snow as the beast thundered past her. The man, Jake, gripped his dagger and rushed to check on his companion. He asked if Luna was safe from the creature's immediate reach. They had only wanted to collect a few viper eggs from the nest. Luna saw the wyvern circling back toward the distracted man. She shouted a warning to Jake about the danger looming behind him. Jake turned and saw the beast's massive jaws snapping at his throat. He believed his life was about to end in the frozen brush. Suddenly, a stranger struck the wyvern with a flash of cold energy. The beast fell bleeding onto the snow, defeated in a single movement. The stranger asked if the two hunters were unharmed. Luna thanked the young man for his swift and timely intervention. The protagonist replied that he only did what was required of a lord. He turned to leave, telling them they would surely see each other later. Before the girl could recover, their mysterious savior vanished from sight. She noted that the man moved with unnatural, lightning-fast speed. Jake looked at the nest, realizing the wyvern's eggs had also disappeared. The new lord arrived at the desolate, empty castle. The young man looked around the quiet, dusty halls with surprise. He wondered why no one was present to greet his inauguration. His assistant apologized and promised to send messengers to every village again. Baron Blizzard said there was no point in wasting more effort. He knew that even with messengers, the locals would likely stay away. The protagonist understood how the previous lords had performed their duties. He finally grasped why the lords in this region changed so frequently. However, the protagonist remained committed to his own singular path. Several days passed in the quiet, tension-filled town. The man from the tavern paced in anger, unsure of the lord's identity. He wondered if the new arrival was truly responsible for the recent shifts. The hunter acknowledged the lord's skill and expressed his own frustration. He admitted he did not expect to be treated with such dominance. The hunter noted that the lord's sword technique was terrifyingly quick. He could not even move his blade when the lord touched his weapon. The blows were sharp, and the resulting pain was truly indescribable. A man burst into the tavern and announced the lord's arrival at the square. The man with the bandaged head declared he would confront the newcomer. His comrades cheered, saying they placed all their faith in Max. They urged him to put an end to the insolent scoundrel. Baron Blizzard stood in the square and watched the growing crowd. There were far more people gathered than he had initially expected. Luna recognized the lord as her savior and whispered to her father. Max approached the lord and asked what he was doing in their town. The girl was shocked to see her father confronting the powerful man. She explained that she had come to see the source of the commotion. Max told the crowd that the new lord had finally arrived. Luna remembered the man's promise and understood his true intent. She told her father that this was the man who saved her life. Max wondered if the man who saved his daughter was really the lord. He recalled that the man had defeated an ice wyvern with one blow. This was a feat impossible for even a seasoned Caroline warrior. Max felt he should acknowledge such a warrior's strength. However, he could not back down in front of his people. The warrior extended his hand, introducing himself as the leader of Caroline. The young man replied that he was Baron Blizzard, the new appointee. He stated that he did not consider himself a great warrior. Max asked if the rumors of the lord beating his people were true. Baron Blizzard replied that he only reprimanded those who dared to rebel. The Baron asked if Max really wanted to end up in their place. The warrior replied that he did not wish for such a fate. Max proposed a test of character through a drinking competition. He noted that drinking strong alcohol was the only way to endure the cold. Baron Blizzard accepted the challenge without hesitation. Max warned him that the local brew was strong enough to boil blood. The Baron replied that he did not care about the potency. He stated that if he won, Max would recognize him as his master. The crowd whispered, thinking the Baron had completely lost his mind. Max agreed to the terms, and witnesses gathered around the table. The two opponents sat opposite each other with mugs of spirit. Max told the lord that it was not too late to forfeit. Baron Blizzard said that a lord could never break his word. The contest began, and the sound of drinking filled the square. After a while, a significant number of mugs lay empty on the table. Zamyak asked Max if he was feeling all right as he stumbled. Max slurred his words, claiming he was the best drunk in all of Krillin. Luna begged her father to stop before he collapsed. Max looked at his opponent and realized his vision was blurring rapidly. Baron Blizzard calmly stated that they would continue the match. Max grew confused, unable to understand why the Lord remained sober. The Baron suggested that his opponent should simply give up now. Max refused, determined to prove his worth until the bitter end. The crowd watched in silence as Max struggled with his next mug. They looked at Baron Blizzard, who drank with effortless, fluid motions. The Lord finished his drink as if it were nothing but juice. He placed the mug down and said he felt perfectly fine. He mused that perhaps his tolerance returned because he had abstained for so long. Max lost his balance and tumbled backward off his chair. He lay on the ground, completely incapacitated by the potent alcohol. The townspeople gasped in shock, unable to believe the outcome. Baron Blizzard rose from his seat and addressed the silent crowd. He ordered everyone to gather at his castle in exactly 5 days. The Lord declared that he wanted to see who would keep their word. At the appointed time, the drawbridge lowered to reveal the path. Lord Blizzard sat upon his throne and surveyed those who arrived. He looked at the villagers and admitted he expected fewer visitors. However, the local people proved they were capable of keeping promises. Max stood among them, nodding in silent, begrudging respect. The Lord added that he was very pleased with their attendance. Baron Blizzard assumed they knew his identity and skipped the pleasantries. He gave the people 10 days to prepare for the upcoming move. Baron Blizzard stood before the gathered crowd in the square. He asked the villagers why they doubted his plan for their relocation. Luna stepped forward and questioned if they were all expected to move into the castle. The Lord shook his head and explained that the castle was merely a temporary hub. He revealed that he had scouted a vast territory in the northern wilderness. The Baron claimed the new land could easily house over 10,000 people. Max frowned and warned that the north was the territory of ice cannibals. He described the creatures as bald, bear-like monsters that walked on 2 legs. Baron Blizzard smirked and asked if Max was referring to those specific beasts. The Lord stated plainly that he had already encountered and destroyed the entire tribe. The villagers exchanged nervous glances as they processed this new information. The Baron assured them that the path ahead was clear and the land was ready. As the meeting concluded, the crowd dispersed toward their homes to pack. The Lord turned to leave, satisfied that his plans were unfolding as intended. A soft voice called out from behind, stopping him in his tracks. Luna and Jake stood there, looking hesitant yet curious. The Baron greeted them, noting he had been about to summon them himself. Jake looked surprised and asked why the Lord required their specific assistance. Blizzard gestured for the pair to follow him toward a secluded area. They walked until they reached a hidden chamber near the castle walls. The Lord pointed to a nest tucked away in the shadows. Luna and Jake gasped as they spotted several baby ice wyverns sleeping inside. Luna realized the Lord had stolen the eggs during his recent expedition. She argued that they had risked their lives to secure those very eggs. Baron Blizzard hushed them, pointing at the fragile hatchlings. He admitted he had considered raising them, but they proved too noisy and hungry. Luna explained that wyverns imprint on the first creature they see upon hatching. She warned that removing them from their nest now was essentially useless. The Lord asked if he should simply discard such troublesome creatures. Jake shook his head, insisting that wyverns were far from annoying. Luna noted that ice wyverns were vastly more powerful than standard breeds. She suggested that the Lord had a rare opportunity to tame them. Jake added that tamed wyverns could easily fly to the city of Tenston. The Lord asked for the location of this mysterious place. Luna explained that Tenston was the second capital of the Kaya Kingdom. She noted it sat 1,000 kilometers west of their current position. The Baron blinked in surprise at the sheer distance mentioned. Jake promised that a round trip on wyvernback would take only 2 hours. The Lord considered the tactical advantage of such rapid aerial transport. He turned to the young pair and announced he had a brilliant idea. A few days later, the great migration of the Karellan people began. The caravan stretched across the frozen landscape under a harsh wind. A young woman approached the teacher, whispering that the people were struggling. The Baron observed the weary faces of the villagers as they marched. He knew that trust was thin and many still doubted his leadership. He stood atop a rise and commanded the entire group to halt. His voice carried over the wind, demanding their full attention. He promised that their destination was only a short distance away. An old hunter shouted back that they had no proof of a safe home. He feared they were walking into another trap of ice cannibals. Baron Blizzard reminded them of his vow to eradicate the beasts. He asked for their patience until they reached the final summit. The caravan moved forward, cresting the final ridge of the northern range. Below them lay a vast, sheltered valley protected from the biting winds. The villagers stared in awe at the hidden sanctuary. The Lord declared that this land had once been a cannibal refuge. He announced that they would now claim it as their own. He asked the people to help him choose a name for their new home. The crowd cheered in agreement, eager to leave their old lives behind. The Lord looked at the horizon and dubbed the place White Castle. He turned his focus back to the wyverns waiting in the transport crates. Suddenly, a sharp buzzing sound echoed through the valley air. A streak of ball lightning slammed into the ground near the crates. The wyverns shrieked and collapsed, falling into a deep, forced slumber. A young man stood nearby, crackling with residual electrical energy. Baron Blizzard lunged forward, closing the distance in a single heartbeat. He seized the intruder by the throat and slammed him against a rock. The Lord demanded to know the identity of the person who attacked his pets. The intruder's body stiffened, locked in place by an invisible magical pressure. The Lord noted that he had paralyzed the man's limbs but left his tongue free. The captive gasped, identifying himself as Count Jerome Vonneran. He claimed to recognize the legendary Blizzard who saved the king's life. The Baron asked if this was the same lord who had been exiled from these lands. Jerome nodded, attempting to justify his past actions with weak excuses. The Lord tightened his grip, pulling the Count closer to his face. He declared that they were far from equals, despite the Count's title. Blizzard stated that the man had failed his duties and deserved to be stripped. He threatened to destroy the Count if he continued to speak insolently. The wizard paled, assuring the Lord that he would remain obedient. Blizzard ordered the Count to use his magic to heal the injured wyverns. Jerome hesitated, but the pressure on his throat forced him to comply. The Lord decided that a man with such magic could be put to better use. He demanded that the Count draft a letter to the Queen immediately. The letter was to request an official exemption from all regional taxes. Jerome warned that other nobles would view this as a grave injustice. He argued that the king would never grant such a controversial request. The Baron sighed, realizing the political web was more tangled than expected. He tossed a stack of administrative papers toward the Count's feet. He ordered Jerome to start processing the mountain of work immediately. The Count picked up the documents with trembling, begrudging hands. Elsewhere, the warriors of Corellon gathered at a designated training ground. Jake and Luna stood in the front, fully armed and alert. The Baron arrived and informed them of their new, dangerous objective. He commanded them to form teams of 30 to hunt for more wyvern eggs. He promised a reward of 100 gold coins to the most successful team. The warriors gasped, never having seen such a fortune in their lives. Baron Blizzard swore that his rewards were never empty promises. He watched as the teams organized, looking for potential in every soldier. He whispered to himself that he would build an army to rival the best. He refused to lose to his enemies a second time in this life. The soldiers marched out into the ice, driven by the lure of gold. They moved with newfound purpose, determined to prove their worth. The Baron stood alone on the ramparts, watching his new empire grow. Max shouts for the second squad to pull the net tight. The heavy ropes snap taut as the ice wyvern hits the ground. The massive beast thrashes, but the mesh holds it firmly in place. Baron Blizzard observes the struggle from the edge of the snowy ridge. He nods to his men, noting that the coordinated attack looks effective. Count Jerome stands nearby, watching the warriors work with newfound precision. He remarks that the hunters have spent days training in the frozen wastes. Their hands and feet move now in a perfect rhythmic sync. Jerome considers the immense value of raising these creatures from infancy. He imagines the profits from selling wyvern skin and bones in distant cities. His mind drifts to the bustling seaports where the wyverns will eventually unload cargo. Baron Blizzard turns his gaze to the exhausted but triumphant warriors. He promises that everyone will receive a generous reward for the eggs. The hunters roar in excitement, throwing their spears into the air. Jerome watches the unruly people of Corellon unite under the Baron's influence. He notes that such unity is the key to achieving truly amazing things. A loud crash echoes as the final ice wyvern falls to the ground. A warrior named Storm stands over the carcass with his blade drawn. Baron Blizzard walks forward to inspect the fallen beast. He asks the crowd who was responsible for the final blow. Jerome identifies the man as the legendary Storm Shorta. The nickname implies a history of fame and dangerous exploits. Storm was once a hero to the commoners, raiding the estates of corrupt nobles. He had been captured and imprisoned, but he eventually managed to escape. The protagonist studies the way Storm interacts with the local villagers. He concludes that the man appears to be a decent and capable ally. Jerome suggests that there are others in the camp who possess hidden talents. Baron Blizzard addresses the group, praising their diligence and hard work. They have successfully secured a sufficient number of ice wyvern eggs. He confirms that the promised rewards will be distributed immediately. Max steps forward, holding a crate of eggs, and asks about their true purpose. The Baron explains that the creatures will bond with the first person they see. This primal instinct is the secret to taming them for long-distance transport. Loaded wyverns will soon carry goods to every corner of the country. Max asks what specific goods the fledgling transport network will carry. Blizzard points toward the horizon, naming ice ogre leather as the first export. The warriors exchange shocked glances, fearing the danger of such a task. The Baron asks who they think cleared the ogres from the valley. He vows that he will never allow his men to become food for monsters. The soldiers straighten their backs, feeling a sudden surge of courage. They pledge their absolute loyalty to the man who saved their homes. A young villager runs toward the teacher, shouting for immediate help. He reports that his sister, Sabina, has collapsed from a sudden fever. Other brothers huddle around the girl, covering her with extra furs. Sabina shivers violently, whispering her thanks to her brother Luffy. The children plead with the Baron to save their companion. Blizzard pushes through the crowd to examine the pale girl. He notices her skin is deathly cold to the touch. The situation is far more dire than he initially assumed. He asks the children to recount exactly what happened to her. Luffy explains that they were helping Mr. Osborne scout a pen for the wyverns. They stumbled upon a secret field filled with rare ice flowers. Sabina picked the blossoms, hoping to present them as a gift to the teacher. She collapsed the moment she returned to the camp. The protagonist takes the wilted flower from the girl's trembling hand. He recognizes the plant as a rare snow flower from the northern reaches. It is a potent elixir in the Central Plains, but dangerous to touch. He orders Leo to carry the unconscious girl to the training ground. The group rushes across the snow, moving as quickly as possible. Leo lays Sabina gently onto a wooden bench. Blizzard warns the children to keep their distance during the treatment. He channels his own ice energy to stabilize the girl's core. The snowflower radiates a bitter, freezing aura throughout the room. The protagonist knows that the girl fainted because her own internal energy was too weak. He places a petal of the flower into her mouth. He calls her name, demanding she focus her mind. Sabina gasps, her eyes snapping open as she directs her internal flow. The Baron watches as the cold energy condenses into pure internal power. The process is seamless, leaving no sign of lingering side effects. Sabina falls into a deep, peaceful sleep on the couch. Blizzard observes that her internal energy has increased significantly. The results are far better than he had originally hoped. He plans to intensify the children's training once she fully recovers. He decides to visit the flower field himself before the girl wakes up. With the wyvern egg secured, a massive reorganization begins at White Castle. Saul Mudok helps organize the elite knights into a new squad. Baron Blizzard officially appoints them as the Knights of Ban. Storm is named captain, having demonstrated the best combat results. Schools, hospitals, and trading posts rise from the frozen ground. Saul Mudok rotates workers into roles that match their personal talents. Osborne takes charge of the castle security service. Jerome steps into the role of the Baron's personal assistant. Jerome expresses his desire to focus on teaching magic to the villagers. Two distinct armed groups emerge to protect the new territory. The guard squad secures the outer perimeter and tracks down stray residents. The Knights of the Wyvern form the second elite force. Jake requests command of the flying unit for himself. Blizzard informs Luna that he will personally lead the first squad. Luna is tasked with managing the administrative duties in his stead. Several days pass as the new systems take hold. Jerome arrives late to a meeting, sweating and overwhelmed by the workload. He apologizes profusely, hoping the Lord will lighten his burden. Max notes that the briefing has already commenced. Jerome spots Sabina in the room, surprised she is back on her feet. Blizzard tells his assistant to sit, as time is of the essence. Osborne reports that the prison is filling with fugitives from outside the valley. Max suggests that these criminals be dealt with immediately. Jake agrees, insisting they pose a threat to the castle's stability. Blizzard turns the table, asking if they should also arrest the instigators of the old uprising. He reminds them that the uprising led to Jerome's unfair expulsion. Max stammers, claiming that was a different situation involving self-defense. He realizes his hypocrisy and offers a quick apology to Storm. Storm urges the group to remember the suffering of the common people. The Baron questions how his advisors could be so short-sighted. Sabina raises her hand, asking to share her own perspective. She points out that the village currently views the prisoners with deep suspicion. She notes that the hunt for the remaining cannibals begins today. Blizzard asks why the prisoners should be involved in the operation. Sabina proposes that the inmates be placed at the very front of the line. The Baron pauses, considering the tactical and social implications. He signals for the girl to continue her line of reasoning. The hunter warns Captain Short that the target may have escaped. Gregory and Lennon march at the head of the vanguard. Captain Short nods, signaling the men to conceal their presence. They plan to stalk the target and strike when the time is right. An armed ice ogre lumbers along the narrow, snow-covered path. Gregory and Lennon leap from the shadows to attack from behind. The ogre roars, swinging a heavy club in a desperate rage. Blood sprays across the white snow as the beast falls. Sabina repeats her suggestion to use the prisoners as the vanguard. Osborne asks if she intends to use them as literal human shields. He worries that such a move is a dark, final resort. Sabina argues that if the teacher accompanies them, it will be a merciful path. It is better than leaving them to rot in a prison cell, she insists. The teacher listens, weighing the value of redemption against the risk of betrayal. He does not waste another moment, moving to gather his gear. Captain Short checks on Lennon after the chaotic skirmish in the snow. Lennon wipes sweat from his brow and admits the encounter carried significant risk. Schwartz and Gregory laugh at the absurdity of their narrow escape. The captain compares their struggle to the desperate prison riot. Lennon nods, noting that the mission serves as a chance for redemption. Baron Blizzard watches the men from a distance with a satisfied expression. He believes the shared hardship will finally unify the former criminals. The young lord feels pride that his student Sabina proposed such a strategy. A massive, shadowy creature watches the humans from behind a gnarled tree. The hunter commands his squad to maintain their formation and steady pace. He orders the men to approach the hidden trap with extreme caution. The masked hunter draws his bow and prepares to loose several arrows at once. The projectiles whistle through the air and strike the bark of the tree. The hunters scan the area but find no target pinned to the wood. The archer explains he mistook the rustling leaves for a lurking enemy. They move forward to retrieve their spent arrows and search the immediate perimeter. A colossal monster suddenly bursts from behind the thick pine trees. The hunters freeze in place, stunned by the creature's immense stature. Baron Blizzard remarks to his assistant that the duchy's people are losing their fear. Osborne nods, observing the newfound energy in the ranks of the soldiers. Jerome attributes the change entirely to the Baron's firm and calculated leadership. The Lord notes that every step of his plan proceeds according to schedule. He instructs Jerome to ensure no one acts with reckless impatience. The soldiers coordinate their movements and successfully dismantle the ogre. Osborne asks Jerome if they are documenting species beyond ogres and wyverns. Jerome admits that the current research still requires a more systematic approach. A warrior from the front line approaches to report on the recent clash. He confirms all men survived but sustained serious injuries during the fight. Blizzard demands an explanation for the unexpected severity of the injuries. Osborne reports a problem involving a beast unlike any known ice ogre. The soldier describes two men being mauled by a creature of a different species. Its massive body is covered in thick, pristine white fur. Baron Blizzard abruptly informs Jerome that the hunt has reached its conclusion. Jerome looks confused and asks if the Lord intends to hunt alone. The protagonist confirms he must handle this specific threat by himself. He remembers the guild leader Edmund Roll mentioning the legendary Yeti. Saul Mudok activates his inner vision to scan the frozen landscape. A massive, snow-white silhouette flickers in the distance. Saul Mudok unsheathes his blade and charges directly toward the Yeti. Terror flashes in the beast's eyes as it sees the oncoming warrior. Saul Mudok realizes his initial strike failed to land a lethal blow. The Yeti moves with surprising speed despite its enormous size. It roars in defense of its territory, showing no signs of retreat. The protagonist wonders why a creature so aggressive would suddenly act so fearful. It seems to sense the overwhelming power radiating from its opponent. The beast's animalistic gaze shifts from aggression to pure panic. Curiosity pushes the hero to consider sparing the creature's life. He decides he cannot show mercy to a beast that harmed his people. He wishes for the creature to be reborn as a human in its next life. A sudden flash of blinding light erupts on the battlefield. The Yeti vanishes into thin air a heartbeat before the blade strikes. Saul Mudok recalls Luffy mentioning that warp magic belongs to the fifth circle. Most mages in this world never advance beyond the first or second circle. The fifth circle represents a spiritual or earthly level of mastery. A humanoid creature covered in fur has just performed high-level magic. The hero vows to track the creature down, regardless of the difficulty. He notes the Yeti fled like a cornered rat, unable to travel far. He senses a lingering magical signature nearby in the frozen woods. Baron Blizzard discovers a deep, hidden cave tucked into the forest cliff. He descends into the darkness and finds a secret underground archive. The Yeti sits shivering on the cold stone floor of the cave. The protagonist asks the beast what it is doing in such a place. The Yeti cowers and begs the man to stay away. Blizzard assures the creature that he intends to do no harm. The Yeti speaks in a deep voice, claiming to be the warrior Huari Condal. Jerome appears in the cave entrance behind the Baron. He explains to the Lord that they have found a legendary snowman. Blizzard notes that Jerome arrived at the perfect moment. Jerome surveys the area and spots deep trails of destruction. He remarks that only the Baron could cause such environmental damage. The Baron asks why a member of an ancient clan hides here. Jerome echoes the question, staring at the massive, fur-covered figure. The protagonist demands to know the origin of the warrior Condal. The Yeti remains silent, clutching his injured arm. Blizzard warns him not to test his patience with further evasion. Condal finally admits he hails from the distant land of Glack. Blizzard asks if Glack is his home village. The Yeti lowers his head in silent, sorrowful confirmation. The hero demands an explanation for the attack on his men. The Yeti insists he never attacked the humans. He claims to be a warrior who never fights without just cause. Jerome notes that the snowman does not seem to be lying. Most soldiers were wounded, but none had actually perished. Blizzard recalls the report that all men were alive in the hospital. Condal explains that the humans invaded sacred land and had to be driven off. He maintains that he never strikes the first blow. Blizzard realizes his men stumbled into the territory of the Snow People. Edmund had provided false information regarding the nature of these beings. The Baron instructs Jerome to provide healing for Condal's wounds. Jerome approaches the snowman and promises the pain will be brief. Baron Blizzard asks Condal to guide him to the sacred land. He promises to order his people to respect the boundary forever. The Baron reminds Condal that a servant cannot address him informally. He thinks that a creature unable to speak properly lacks basic manners. Jerome reports that the rehabilitation process is complete. Condal stands up, his wounds fully healed by the magic. Jerome asks the Lord for a private favor. Edmund Roll clutches his head as he talks to Henry. He asks how much time has passed since the promised deadline. Henry calculates the time and says, 3 months have elapsed. Edmund removes his hat and declares that the guild is finished. Henry expresses shock, asking if the trade guild is truly failing. Edmund laments that the magical swordsman never sent the promised ice. Henry tells Edmund to remain calm and keep his faith. He insists the swordsman is not the type to break a promise. A massive, winged shadow suddenly blocks out the sun. Edmund and Henry stumble backward in sheer terror. A colossal ice wyvern descends from the sky. The men fall to the ground, unable to keep their balance. The wyvern lands gracefully in front of the guild headquarters. Sabina sits atop the beast, controlling it with ease. She greets Mr. Edmund and announces the arrival of fresh ice. Edmund gasps, realizing the swordsman kept his word after all. Henry stares at the wyvern, stunned by its immense power. He knows this single monster could defeat an entire army of knights. He wonders what kind of power the swordsman wields in the north. Sabina pulls an envelope from her bag for the guildmaster. Princess Isle enjoys her morning tea in the palace garden. The young man thanks her for accepting his formal invitation. He compliments her, saying she grows more beautiful with each passing day. Isle replies that Justin is far too kind to her. Justin thinks the princess remains as straightforward as ever. She does not even attempt to fake a polite smile. He decides to wait and see if he can earn a genuine expression. A maid approaches the princess with a silver tray. She reports that a letter has arrived from Baron Blizzard. Princess Isle rises from her seat and prepares to leave. Justin asks if she is truly departing so soon. He explains that he came to see her in the morning. The girl says one day is never enough for proper fencing practice. She tells Justin not to waste time and to return home. The princess walks toward the palace with her assistant. Justin watches her go, his face contorted with pure anger. He feels that Baron Blizzard interferes with his plans at every turn. Isle unfolds the letter and begins to read the message. The letter opens with a warm greeting from the Baron. He mentions that life is good thanks to her lucky charm. The girl blushes as she remembers their brief, singular kiss. Blizzard describes the northern lands as a beautiful, crystalline paradise. He writes of dazzling caves and warm, natural hot springs. He mentions the construction of the new city, White Castle. The Baron adds that the place is perfect in every way. He laments that Princess Isle is not there to see it. He includes a small, magical gift to express his longing. An icy flower materializes in the girl's trembling hands. Blizzard promises to write to her again very soon. The princess wonders why she cannot stop thinking about him. She stares at the glowing ice flower with wide, curious eyes. Isle decides she must travel north to see the truth for herself. The protagonist had carefully enchanted the flower before sending it. He remains confident that his charm will eventually break her indifference. Jerome approaches the office with a frantic stride. The assistant gestures toward a collection of dusty artifacts. Baron Blizzard examines the strange items with a raised brow. He wonders if this discovery is truly an ancient wizard's library. Jerome insists that these relics hold the key to reviving forgotten magic. He claims they offer the potential to surpass the fifth circle. Baron Blizzard senses a pulse of raw energy emanating from a small bag. He asks the mage what he has hidden from his lord. Jerome produces a pouch filled with shimmering, translucent crystals. He describes them as simple mana stones containing compressed power. The Baron notes that people naturally grow curious when things are concealed. Jerome admits he kept them to aid his own stalled advancement. The mage explains his struggle to break through to the fifth circle. Baron Blizzard acknowledges the difficulty of such a magical barrier. Count Carowinde expresses gratitude for his lord's rare understanding. The Baron states firmly that relying on such shortcuts is unacceptable. Jerome looks stunned at the sudden rejection of his progress. The Baron explains that growth requires patience and steady, hard work. He warns that magic does not tolerate those who seek to rush. Jerome bows his head, remembering his grandfather's ancient teachings. The Baron asks how these stones function in practical scenarios. Jerome lists their uses for enhancing mana and creating defensive barriers. He confirms that a communication spell cast on a stone requires no innate magic. The Baron realizes the strategic advantage of such a device. He orders Jerome to convert all remaining mana stones into communication tools. The team begins the process of etching magical runes onto the crystals. Baron Blizzard tests the connection with a calm, focused gaze. He asks for the location of the scout currently patrolling the skies. Jake's voice crackles clearly through the stone from 10 kilometers away. The young scout reports that he is flying an ice wyvern above the plains. The transmission remains perfectly crisp without a hint of static. Baron Blizzard smiles, recognizing this as a massive technological leap. He commands Jake to perform a complex aerial maneuver before returning. The scout jokingly promises to execute a triple pike with a twist. The Baron instructs Osborne to expand the range of all future tests. Jerome worries that excessive testing might shatter the fragile device. Sabina rushes into the room, reporting her safe arrival on the Wyvern. Baron Blizzard opens the letter Sabina brought from Edmund Rowe. He reviews the political report regarding the surrounding kingdoms. The mention of a man named Anos catches his immediate attention. He asks his allies if the name holds any significant weight. Stormshort claims the rumors point to a legendary Grandmaster of the Sword. The room falls into a tense, heavy silence. The Baron notes that a Grandmaster supposedly reaches the realm of enlightenment. He explains that such masters can manifest a physical sword aura. The hero laments that the world lacks worthy opponents for his skill. He wonders if this master truly possesses the fragrance of plum blossoms. This specific technique belongs to the legendary Hua Mountain sect. The hero recalls a past life spent uniting the Central Plains. He remembers his duel against Zhongpong Jun, the sect leader. The rival had once claimed his missing disciple was a master of that style. The Baron wonders if someone truly crossed from the Central Plains to this world. Jerome interrupts his thoughts to ask about the rest of the letter. The Baron reports that the kingdom has sent an official inspection team. The group looks out the window to see knights gathered at the gate. A familiar figure stands at the front of the royal company. It is Justin, the son of the powerful Duke Icarus. The knight demands that the Lord of White Castle appear immediately. Baron Blizzard steps forward, noting the bandage on Justin's arm. Justin hides his injured hand behind his back, his face reddening with rage. The Baron realizes the inspection is likely a guise for a different motive. He gestures for Princess Isle to step out from behind the armored knights. The princess smiles, noting that Justin has ceased his open threats. She gazes at the shimmering crystal cave with undisguised wonder. The Baron leads her toward the natural hot springs of the north. The princess admits she begged her father for this official visit. She blushes when the Baron mentions the magical talisman he sent her. The hero recognizes her behavior as identical to his past love, Hua Yun. He leads her into the mist of the warm, bubbling spring. Princess Isle remarks on the breathtaking beauty of the hidden landscape. The hero pulls her into a gentle, unexpected embrace. He calls her by the name Hua Yun in a moment of lost time. The princess pulls back, her eyes wide with confusion. She asks who this mystery woman is and why he used that name. The hero apologizes, claiming the word simply slipped out. Princess Isle admits she feels a deep warmth in his presence. She states that she understands his heart belongs to someone else. The Baron tries to explain, but she shakes her head in refusal. She insists that no further explanation is required between them. The hero stands speechless as the steam rises around them. He knows the truth of his reincarnation remains beyond her grasp. He watches the princess, accepting the distance between their two worlds. A stranger emerges from the shadows behind a large tree. He grips a sharp knife and lunges toward the protagonist. Justin calls out to Arbin, demanding to know the outcome. He asks if the ambush on the Baron was successful. Blood stains the pristine snow near the base of the tree. The hero's crystal pendant lies discarded in the freezing slush. Justin stands over the body of a fallen night guard. He wipes his bloodied sword clean with a slow movement. A young woman watches him with wide, trembling eyes. Justin offers a mocking apology to the princess for his intrusion. A servant cowers in the corner, desperate to remain unseen. Justin kicks the heavy door off its hinges with a thud. The princess stumbles backward, falling hard against the floor. Justin steps into the room, looming over her prone figure. He tells the royal lady that her behavior was quite rude. He claims she dismissed his feelings for a common stranger. The princess rises, her face burning with sudden indignation. She commands Justin to repeat his words if he dares. Ezel tells him that he created a scene over nothing. She insists that Baron Blizzard will not let this slide. Justin laughs, claiming the princess still thinks of the Baron. He reveals with a sneer that the Baron is already dead. The cunning man explains that he sent elite assassins to finish him. Ezel closes her eyes, bracing herself against the cruel news. She opens them to see Baron Blizzard standing directly before her. The hero asks the princess if she suffered any injuries. She answers that she is fine, but asks about his condition. The Baron suddenly leaps to the side with incredible speed. A hidden enemy blade whistles through the space he just occupied. Blizzard eyes the attacker, surprised by the sudden assault. He wonders if his opponent truly wields a sword using Kai. The Baron pulls the princess close to shield her from harm. He realizes this entire trap was Justin's carefully laid design. A knight in heavy plate armor steps into the room. Duke Icarus asks his son if he intends to finish the job. Justin begs his father for control of the elite assassin unit. He claims these killers can eliminate even a master swordsman. The Duke shakes his head, stating that would not be enough. He tells his son that proper preparation is required for victory. A sword materializes in the Duke's hand, glowing with raw mana. The blade pulses as it weaves a layer of magical armor. Baron Blizzard dodges the strikes while keeping the princess safe. Justin grins with joy, believing this weapon can kill a grandmaster. He decides the failures of the mercenaries were actually a blessing. He declares his intent to finish the Baron off personally. The princess trembles, fearing for the safety of the Baron. The hero instructs her to stay in a secure location. He tells his servant to hide and remain out of sight. He promises the girl that he will return very soon. The two rivals face each other in the center of the hall. The hero notes that Justin has changed since their last battle. He remarks that the man remains just as unremarkable as before. Justin dismisses the comment as another empty lecture. He draws his sword and charges toward his opponent. He assumes the Baron is exhausted from fighting the previous mercenaries. Justin believes this is the perfect moment for a killing blow. The Baron sidesteps the clumsy strike with effortless grace. He delivers a precise counterattack to his opponent's shoulder. Justin cries out in agony as the blade bites deep. He clutches his wounded arm and drops to his knees. The hero channels his unique abilities to maintain the distance. He warns Justin that he cannot harm Princess Essel from here. Justin looks up, his face twisted in pure, unbridled outrage. He asks if the Baron faked his injury to lure him away. The Baron explains that a cornered beast is always dangerous. He compares the situation to a mouse biting a cornered cat. The hero states that a rat like Justin deserves no mercy. He declares that there will be no forgiveness for this betrayal. Justin lunges again, screaming that the Baron underestimates him. The hero replies that he always exercises extreme caution. He strikes again, using his unique powers to overwhelm the knight. Justin collapses to his knees, utterly defeated by the display. He looks up, confused by his inability to gather mana. The Baron tells him that his desperate attempts are futile. He reveals that Justin's Danton has been permanently destroyed. The man will never be able to channel mana again. Justin screams in despair, unable to accept his sudden worthlessness. The hero delivers a sharp slap across the man's cheek. Justin flies across the room, landing hard against the wall. The hero tells him to spend his life in quiet repentance. He adds that Justin will now learn the meaning of weakness. He glances toward the mountains where the Duke hides in shadows. He notes that it is far too late for further intervention. He turns away, thinking of the princess waiting for his return. Justin's complex plan lies in ruins, completely and irrevocably shattered. The captured criminals are dragged away to the castle dungeons. Baron Blizzard tells Jerome that this is how he handles leaders. He notes that the man still struggles with his damaged mana. The hero decides his only priority is to find Princess Essel. He spots the princess and Jerome talking together in the hall. The princess holds the young man's hands in a gesture of comfort. The hero pauses, surprised by the intimate sight before him. 15 minutes earlier, the group searched the snowy grounds. The Baron instructed his men to scour the area for the pendant. He promised a generous reward to whoever found the lost item. Jerome asked if this was where the ambush had occurred. Blizzard confirmed the location and the loss of his precious heirloom. Jerome admitted he had uncovered the truth about the assassins. He noted that they were experienced killers despite their failure. He asked how the Baron managed to fight them off alone. Blizzard admitted the killers moved quietly but lacked true strength. He claimed that if he were healthy, he would be untouched. Jerome replied that he was deeply impressed by the man's skill. The princess approached them, apologizing for the loss of the necklace. The hero turned, surprised to see her standing so close. She expressed deep regret for not searching sooner. She explained that she had been busy on a rescue mission. The Baron told her that the fault lay entirely with Justin. He insisted that Jerome could confirm the scoundrel's guilt. Princess Essel looked at Count Jerome with wide, shocked eyes. She asked why the Count was there, having heard he disappeared. Jerome felt uncomfortable under her intense, curious gaze. He stood in silence, unsure how to act before the Baron. Blizzard placed a reassuring hand on the Count's shoulder. He asked the princess if they were close acquaintances. The princess replied that the Lord had misunderstood the situation. The Baron insisted that he understood the dynamic perfectly well. A maid whispered to the princess, suggesting she clear the air. Blizzard asked Jerome who the princess respected the most. Essel confirmed that Jerome was indeed a man of great character. She praised the Count as an aristocrat who served the people. She expressed sadness regarding his exile to this remote region. The Baron wondered why Jerome kept his past a secret. The Count retorted by asking who would brag about good deeds. The Baron asked why the princess spoke in the past tense. Essel replied that she only understood the truth after meeting him. She turned away, blushing, and walked toward the small clearing. She reached the spot where the pendant lay in the grass. She picked up the crystal, noting its faint, rhythmic pulsing light. The princess decided she must inform the Baron of the discovery. She wondered if the pendant belonged to the girl named Huayan. The maid noted that the princess shared the Baron's expression. She warned the princess not to rush into a new romance. The princess stared at the glowing stone, consumed by sudden jealousy. She wondered what kind of woman could capture such a heart. She eventually returned the pendant to the waiting baron. The crystal shone brighter than ever as their fingers touched. Don Chunhak ordered his men to remove the flowering branch. He called the symbol of true love utter, baseless nonsense. His daughter, Huayan, sat silently on the cold stone floor. He reminded her that she was already promised to another. He told her to stop distracting herself with foolish dreams. He demanded she prepare for the wedding he had arranged. Huayan looked up, telling her father to open his eyes. She claimed those who bloom the lotus are blessed soulmates. She asked if he still insisted on marriage after seeing miracles. She accused her father of valuing alliances over his own child. She reminded him that he abandoned her mother for power. Don Chunhak ordered the guards to lock Huayan in the tower. He forbade her from entering the palace until the wedding. He ordered the guards to keep a constant watch on her. Huayan stared at the wall, wishing she would never return. Princess Essel woke from the memory, wondering if it was a dream. She looked out the window as the first light hit the horizon. She walked out to the hot springs with her loyal maid. She pondered the identity of the mysterious woman from the vision. Baron Blizzard met her there, asking about her troubled look. The princess claimed she was fine and asked about his mourning. She insisted that the Baron had no reason to worry. Blizzard suggested a short trip to help clear her mind. He offered to take her on a flight upon his ice wyvern. The great beast shifted its wings, preparing for the journey. A massive shadow looms over the courtyard as the ice wyvern descends. The princess stares upward, her eyes wide with visible shock. The maid shrinks back, clearly frightened by the beast's immense scale. Baron Blizzard explains that these creatures were trained from birth. He reassures the ladies that the wyverns are friendly and docile. Jerome reports that all preparations for the departure are complete. Jake stands by the aircraft, waiting for the signal to pilot. A small, fluffy white creature scurries out to greet the group. The princess gasps, her surprise turning into soft fascination. Jerome introduces the yeti named Condal, hoping to avoid frightening her. The princess wonders if this is truly one of the legendary snow dwellers. Eiley reaches down to scoop up the tiny, adorable creature. She remarks that she never imagined the legendary beings could be so cute. Baron Blizzard observes the scene, clearly pleased with the success of his work. He previously asked Jerome to shrink the yeti using magic for this moment. The Count previously admitted that his magic was not all-powerful. The princess continues to stroke the creature's soft white fur. Baron Blizzard signals that it is time for the group to depart. The wyvern named Lilith stands ready, her wings folded against her back. The Baron mounts the beast and extends a hand toward the princess. She takes his hand, and the wyverns flap their wings to gain altitude. The group rises steadily, soaring over the vast, snow-covered forest below. The princess grips the railing tightly, her knuckles turning white from fear. She finds the sensation of flight terrifying, yet she trusts the Baron. Baron Blizzard gently suggests that she open her eyes to look ahead. Esseld obeys, and her expression shifts from terror to pure wonder. She sees the sun cresting over the distant golden horizon. Thick white clouds roll beneath their feet like a frozen ocean. The princess whispers that the sight is incredibly beautiful. Jerome checks on her, asking if she feels any better. The princess considers how the Baron has cared for her throughout the journey. Louisa approaches, noting that he should have warned her about the trip. Blizzard points out that communication is difficult over such vast distances. He instructs Louisa to pass all trade information to Jerome immediately. The Baron promises to take the princess to a local restaurant for lunch. Jerome acknowledges the order, needing to finalize his tasks before returning. The princess steps onto the veranda, staring out at the breathtaking landscape. The Baron asks if she enjoys the view he prepared for her. She nods, finding the surroundings peaceful and perfectly suited to her tastes. Her gaze falls upon the flower design embedded in the Baron's pendant. Eld recalls a dream where a mysterious woman wore an identical flower. Blizzard notices her distant look and asks if she is feeling well. The girl explains that a strange dream from the night before haunts her thoughts. She describes people in unfamiliar clothes and houses she never recognized. The dream featured a woman in her early 20s with pale skin. The woman had dark hair and eyes filled with a deep, quiet calm. Sadness marred the woman's face because she loved a man forbidden to her. Her father sought to marry her off to another for political gain. Isolde smiles weakly, admitting the dream felt vivid and strange. She describes the woman in the dream calling out for someone named Gaga. The hero freezes, his expression shifting into one of extreme surprise. He recognizes the name, as only one person ever called him that. The princess asks if the Baron is all right, noting his pale face. Blizzard clutches the crystal tightly, apologizing for his sudden lapse in thought. He gestures to the food, urging the princess to eat before it cools. Eskild makes a small request, asking him to drop the formal title. She admits that calling her princess creates an unnecessary distance between them. The young people finish their meal, leaving their plates completely empty. Jerome enters the tavern to report on his business with the Tenston trading house. He asks if the princess enjoyed the meal provided by the establishment. The princess admits she has never heard of the place called Tenston. She wonders if such a location exists within the Kingdom of Drake. Blizzard explains that Tenston lies within the borders of the Kingdom of Gaia. The Kingdom of Gaia is a powerful state ruled by queens for generations. It is known as the country of women, famous for its martial prowess. The Royal Knightly Order of Gaia consists exclusively of elite female warriors. They are second in strength only to the Knights of the Zeba Empire. Asel realizes they have traveled far, reaching the borders of Gaia. She worries if her presence might cause diplomatic complications for the group. The princess signals for Jerome to continue his report. The Count explains they are currently supplying Gaia with ice ogre skin. Louisa suggests opening a Carolyn workshop to bypass heavy customs duties. Blizzard questions if manufacturing products is worth the extra effort. Jerome explains that Gaia's nobility consists almost entirely of women. Creating custom bags and clothes would set a massive fashion trend. Louisa offers to bring in leather craftsmen she knows from Carolyn. Blizzard decides that appointing Louisa to lead the project is the right move. He promises to secure the raw materials for the new production line. Jerome thanks him, noting that their leather sells out every single delivery day. A sudden, deafening explosion rocks the houses behind the main square. Jerome reports that the blast occurred right near their primary warehouse. He warns that shifting winds could spread the fire to neighboring buildings. Blizzard stands to check the site, ordering Jerome to stay with the princess. The Count argues that the Lord should not go alone due to the danger. Isolde insists that she will accompany the Baron to the scene. Blizzard relents, but tells everyone else to remain where they are. The princess tells the Count they cannot sit idly by while others suffer. A woman nearby screams in despair as her shop begins to burn. She spent her entire life building the business now consumed by flames. Townspeople scramble to find water, shouting for help from the crowd. The Baron reaches the scene, noting the flames are far stronger than expected. He spots Isolde and Jerome nearby, confirming they followed him despite his orders. The protagonist understands her desire to help, as he would do the same. Cries for help echo from deep within the center of the inferno. Baron Blizzard rushes into the burning structure without a moment of hesitation. He activates his divine ice palm, manifesting blocks of ice to clear a path. The young man spots a girl lying unconscious among the debris. He confirms she is still breathing and moves to carry her to safety. He hoists the unconscious girl onto his shoulder, shielding her from heat. Jerome watches the Baron's display, recognizing the power of Ninth Circle ice magic. The Baron emerges from the frozen building, carrying the girl to safety. Late that night, an assistant reports signs of rebellion to Her Highness. The rescued girl wakes up, finding herself lying in a comfortable bed. She rises and walks into the next room, finding the group at dinner. Lucia greets her, asking how she feels after the harrowing ordeal. The stranger asks where she is and who saved her from the fire. Lucia explains she is at the Carolyn Company, saved by Baron Blizzard. The girl hears the company name and seems to recognize its recent popularity. She asks if anyone present hails from the Kingdom of Gaia. Lucia explains they are from the village of Carolyn in the north of Drake. The stranger approaches the Baron to offer her sincere, humble thanks. She introduces herself as Schiller McMahon, causing the room to fall silent. Lucia's eyes widen in shock, and Jake stammers in sudden confusion. Lucia explains that Schiller is the second princess of the Kingdom of Gaia. She is a master of the sword and head of the royal order. She is the most prominent and powerful figure in the entire kingdom. Lucia apologizes profusely for her earlier rudeness toward Her Highness. Jake bows his head, apologizing for his lack of proper decorum. Isle wonders why she had to meet a foreign princess in such circumstances. She fears that revealing the girl's identity could spark a diplomatic scandal. Schiller promises a reward for her life and invites the lord to the palace. Blizzard politely declines, stating he must return home immediately. Lucia worries that refusing a royal reward is a grave insult in Gaia. She notices the Baron looks nervous standing before the powerful princess. Gaia asks how she ended up trapped in the burning building. The princess reveals that Baron Dayton was behind the trap. Schiller admits she supported him, only for him to attempt her murder. She labels the man a coward for his inability to face her directly. Princess Schiller glares at the man who saved her life. She reminds him that he attempted to poison her and burn the building. The princess offers a reward for her rescue, demanding he state his price. Blizzard observes her closely, noting that she seems to be the one needing something. Schiller bristles with indignation at his calm remark. She asks if the Baron intends to mock her. Blizzard invites her to eat, noting she has not touched food since the previous evening. The princess tastes the meal and admits it is surprisingly delicious. She warns him that if he were not her savior, he would already be in a prison cell. Her gaze shifts toward a sword leaning against the nearby wall. Schiller asks the origin of the weapon. Blizzard replies that the blade belongs to him. The princess evaluates his stance, recognizing the posture of a seasoned aristocrat. She challenges him to a duel after they finish their dinner. The other guests stare in silence, shocked by her sudden declaration. Blizzard refuses the challenge with a dismissive wave. He claims he does not fight those who are weaker than himself. Schiller stands, her face flushing with anger at the insult. She demands to know if he understands her reputation as a master swordsman. Foreign knights often refuse to fight her solely because of her gender. She accuses the Baron of being afraid to lose the match. Blizzard rises from the table and walks toward the open air. He tells the princess that he will teach her a lesson. Schiller declares that the duel will follow the strict rules of chivalry. They agree to forbid magical auras during the exchange. The first person to incapacitate their opponent will be declared the winner. Jerome whispers a warning, reminding the Baron that he faces the Princess of Gaia. A single scratch could spark an international conflict between kingdoms. Schiller prepares her stance, having defeated every challenger she ever faced. She watches for the moment the Baron's face will contort in defeat. The princess lunges forward with lightning speed. Blizzard parries the strike with an effortless flick of his wrist. Schiller notes that his reaction time is far beyond a common man. She attacks again, but the Baron deflects her blade once more. Blizzard remains calm, finding the weight of the sword familiar. The two opponents lock eyes, neither breaking their focused gaze. Schiller realizes he parries her best strikes without moving his feet. She decides to launch a full-scale assault. Blizzard steps backward, creating distance between them. He observes her technique, recognizing the legendary penetrating spear style. Schiller unleashes a frenzied, continuous flurry of strikes. The Baron approaches her, deciding to end the match with a single movement. He lunges forward, striking with precise, controlled force. The princess loses her balance, her sword clattering to the floor. Blizzard holds his blade against her neck. The Baron tells her to admit her defeat. Schiller demands an immediate rematch. Jerome suggests returning to the meal, noting the pie is still warm. The princess threatens to file an official protest with the Kingdom of Drake. Blizzard replies that admitting defeat is the true mark of a warrior. He scolds her for behaving like a petulant child. Schiller flies into a rage, shouting that he knows nothing of her life. The Baron points his sword at her once more to cool her temper. The princess drops to her knees, realizing she never even saw him move. Blizzard asks if this is how Gaia treats those who save their royals. He implies he held back because she is a princess. Schiller looks at the ground, wondering why she cannot defeat this man. She remembers her childhood, standing on the podium of a fencing tournament. Her mother had called her a miracle and a future protector. She was trained to be the sword of Gaia, a figure no one dared contradict. Blizzard tells the princess to choose her future opponents with more wisdom. He turns to Esild and suggests a walk around the city. The group plans to return to Carolyn by the next day. Blizzard orders Jerome to purchase additional swords for the armory. Schiller asks Jerome if the woman standing near the Baron is his wife. Jerome denies this, noting she is a noble from a distinguished family. The princess orders her carriage, preparing to return to the palace. She realizes this is the first time she has encountered someone stronger. Schiller commits the name Blizzard to her memory. Upon arriving at the palace, she sends guards to find Baron Dayton. They find the Baron dead in his basement with a note in his hand. The bottom of the page is torn, destroying the name of the mastermind. Schiller finds no other clues leading to the true culprit. Her sister, Rowan McMahon, greets her upon her return. Schiller explains the poison and the fire at the warehouse. Rowan orders her men to bring Baron Dayton to her for questioning. Schiller informs her that the man is already dead. Rowan embraces her sister, expressing relief that she survived. Schiller notices her sister's subtle look of disappointment. She refuses to believe Rowan is behind the attack without hard proof. Rowan mentions the upcoming delegation to King Drake's birthday celebration. Schiller asks to go in her place, surprising her sister. Rowan asks if the man who saved her is in the kingdom of Drake. Schiller blushes, but denies that she has any interest in meeting him. 3 days pass as the group returns to Carolyn. Blizzard worries that the enemy will discover the ice flowers and the wyverns. He moves all diplomatic meetings into the secure, fortified castle. The day of Princess Esild's departure finally arrives. Jerome reports that Schiller is preparing a military offensive. He urges the Baron to strengthen their troops immediately. Esild expresses concern that the conflict will turn into a diplomatic scandal. Blizzard remains unbothered, claiming he has seen such pride in the plains before. He tells Esild that victory will be his, regardless of the threat. He hands her a small, ornate box. Inside lies a communication stone crafted from refined mana. Blizzard explains that the device transmits messages without the need for a mage. The stone functions even while the user remains deep inside a dungeon. Esild stares at the device in total disbelief. Blizzard claims he is always available should she need him. A maid interrupts, announcing the carriage is ready for departure. The world remains unaware of the existence of such powerful technology. The Baron and his aide descended into the dark, cold dungeon. Jerome frowned, glancing at the line of shackled figures in the gloom. The mage asked who these prisoners were. Blizzard explained that they were the mercenaries hired by Justin. They sat in silence, looking gaunt and defeated. Jerome wondered if Justin knew they were still alive. Blizzard suggested that their employer believed them to be dead. The Baron had kept them without food for 10 long days. He watched them closely, evaluating their physical endurance. Compared to the elites of the Central Plains, they seemed weak. 2 figures caught the Baron's eye, showing a sliver of resolve. Blizzard ordered Jerome to provide the prisoners with water and food. The famished men scrambled for the supplies, drinking greedily. Jerome asked why his lord bothered to spare these killers. The Baron stated his intent to forge them into a new squad. The Count looked stunned by the audacity of the plan. Jerome asked if the Lord meant to unleash them upon Gaia. He questioned if the Baron was truly plotting a rebellion. Blizzard remained silent, his gaze fixed on the cold stone floor. The mage sighed, noting the danger of breeding assassins and wyverns. He warned that one misstep would bring accusations of high treason. The princess had departed, leaving the castle quiet once more. Blizzard recalled her invitation to the king's upcoming birthday celebration. He told Jerome that the time had come to enter the political arena. To stand beside a princess, a man must become a duke. He knew this path would be paved with the bodies of his enemies. Blizzard turned to Short, who stood waiting in the shadows. He asked if the Blizzard Knight Order was fully assembled. Short bowed, confirming that every warrior was ready for his command. The Baron faced the prisoners, offering them a grim choice. They would either serve him as subordinates or die immediately. He warned them that they were currently too weak for his army. An intensive training program would begin for those who chose to live. He gestured to the weapons lying on the rack behind him. Blizzard told them that knights were waiting outside to begin the slaughter. 3 weeks of brutal training unfolded within the dense forest. The mercenaries and the knights clashed in a continuous, desperate struggle. A knight lunged forward, striking down a mercenary in the mud. He triumphantly raised a stolen emblem, claiming the victory. The defeated mercenary was dragged aside to catch his breath. Blizzard observed the chaos from the high branch of a tree. He noted that the knights were consistently winning these skirmishes. Jerome maintained a tracking spell over every assassin in the woods. An alarm would sound if any of them dared to flee. Blizzard walked toward Miller, who sat leaning against a rough trunk. He noted that this was the man's 10th attempt at escape. The Baron warned that the next attempt would be his last. Miller glared at him, shouting that he had no time for games. Suddenly, another assassin tackled Miller, pinning him to the ground. Baker, the captain of the assassins, stepped forward to apologize. He asked the Lord to show mercy to his defiant comrade. Blizzard asked why Miller was so desperate to leave his service. Baker explained that Miller sought revenge against a specific enemy. The boy's family had been slaughtered years ago, leaving him alone. Miller had learned the culprit would attend the capital's royal celebration. The Baron realized the man spoke of King Drake's birthday party. He pointed out that the event would be guarded by hundreds of mages. Blizzard asked if Miller truly believed he could kill his target unnoticed. Miller stood up, his eyes burning with a singular, hollow purpose. He claimed he existed only for revenge and feared no death. The Baron told him that such a plan would end in failure. He predicted Miller would die like a dog before reaching his goal. Blizzard offered a deal, promising to facilitate the assassin's revenge. In exchange, Miller would swear his life to the Baron. The young man stared, shocked that a noble would make such an offer. Blizzard explained that Miller was a rare talent for his age. He saw the potential for the boy to become a top-class killer. Miller bowed his head, agreeing to any terms for his vengeance. Blizzard told him to prepare for their departure in a few days. Sabina entered the room, holding a chilled bowl of ice cream. She offered the treat to the teacher with a shy smile. The Baron accepted, noting that they should eat before it melted. Miller watched the girl, wondering about her place in the Baron's life. Meanwhile, Duke Icarus sat in his study, trembling with rage. He cursed his son for losing despite the use of a powerful artifact. He summoned Roxlin, demanding to know how to stop the Baron. Roxlin promised the Duke that he would handle Blizzard personally. The Baron practiced his speech for the relocation of the residents. 6,000 people had to be moved out of the city of Totaline. He counted his resources, noting they had only 6 wyvern eggs. Max, the captain of the guard, confirmed the Baron's intelligence was correct. Blizzard dismissed the administrative talk to focus on the king's gift. He asked his advisors what to give King Tomalof III for his birthday. The room fell silent as they stared at him in confusion. The Baron insisted the gift must surpass anything from Duke Icarus. Max suggested the hides of rare ice ogres for the winter season. Blizzard shook his head, calling the idea far too simple. Osborne suggested the ice flowers that bloomed only in Carolyn. Jerome warned that the flowers would wither in the capital's heat. Short argued that they had no other viable options for a gift. Suddenly, Jake burst into the room, gasping for breath. He reported that all trade roads had been completely blocked. Blizzard asked for an explanation, his expression turning cold and sharp. Jake explained that Roxlin had hiked the fees for road usage. The Baron asked why they could not simply fly over the blockade. Jake reminded him that wyverns were restricted by heavy weight limits. Jerome confirmed that they had to cross the city of Tat. The enemy was unaware of the wyverns and expected a land route. Blizzard realized the trap was set to keep him from the festival. He suspected that Roxlin was acting under the Duke's orders. The Baron stated that he had no choice but to respond. Jerome asked if the Lord intended to start a territorial war. Blizzard nodded, confirming that it was a conflict between landowners. He noted that they would stay within the bounds of royal law. A territorial war required an official declaration to the king. However, a swift victory could end the fight before news arrived. The Baron turned toward the window, looking toward the distant capital. He prepared his men, knowing the journey would be a battlefield. He checked his blade, ready to carve a path through the blockade. The era of peace in the province was coming to an end. He would arrive at the king's party as a rising power. The knights stood in formation, waiting for the final command. Blizzard stepped out of the castle, his cape billowing in the wind. He looked at his squad of assassins, seeing the steel in their eyes. The march toward the capital began as the sun touched the horizon. Every man knew that the road ahead would be stained with blood. The Baron kept his gaze forward, ignoring the fear in the ranks. He intended to show the kingdom exactly what he had become. The first checkpoint appeared in the distance, guarded by Roxlin's men. Blizzard raised his hand, signaling his forces to prepare for combat. The silence of the forest was broken by the sound of steel. He watched as his knights charged, overwhelming the surprised guards. The blockade crumbled in minutes under the weight of his assault. He didn't stop, pushing his men further toward the heart of Tat. The enemy commanders scrambled, realizing their trap had already been broken. Blizzard rode at the front, his presence commanding the entire field. He knew that the true war would start at the king's feet. The path to becoming a duke was stained with the blood of fools. He whispered to himself that the capital would soon know his name. The horses galloped onward, leaving a trail of dust and defeated men. The journey to the birthday celebration had officially turned into a crusade. Blizzard felt the cold resolve of his past life returning to him. He was no longer just a baron of a small, forgotten province. He was the storm that would soon swallow the entire kingdom whole. The guards at the city gates watched the approaching army with dread. They recognized the banner of the blizzard, a sign of certain doom. The baron did not slow down, forcing the gates to swing wide. He entered the city of Tat as a conqueror, not a guest. His eyes scanned the streets, looking for any sign of Roxlin. He knew the man was hiding, waiting for the king's protection. Blizzard would not give him that luxury tonight. The hunt for the Duke's lapdog had begun in earnest. He ordered his men to secure the perimeter and wait for orders. The city was silent, the citizens hiding behind locked wooden doors. He walked through the center square, his footsteps echoing on stone. He found the governor's manor, standing tall at the city's heart. The baron drew his sword, the metal gleaming under the pale moonlight. He kicked the heavy doors open, revealing a hallway of guards. They trembled at the sight of the man they had been told to stop. Blizzard moved with the grace of a predator, striking with lethal intent. He cleared the path to the inner chambers in a matter of seconds. Roxlin stood at the balcony, trapped by the encroaching shadows of his past. The baron stepped into the light, his face devoid of any mercy. He asked the man if he truly thought a road could stop him. Roxlin stammered, his voice failing as he looked at the bloodied blade. Blizzard didn't wait for an answer, ending the conversation with a strike. The territorial war was over before the king even knew it began. He wiped his blade clean, satisfied with the speed of his victory. His eyes turned back toward the capital, his ultimate goal in sight. The king's birthday would be the stage for his final ascent. He gathered his men, preparing to continue the journey at dawn. The province of Carolyn was no longer a secret, but a threat. He stepped back into the night, the master of his own fate. The world would soon realize that the strongest mage had returned. He looked at the communication stone, waiting for a sign from Esseld. He knew the princess would be watching his next move with interest. The path ahead was clear, and he would walk it with power. He was the Baron, the Mage, and the soon-to-be Duke of Gaia. The king's birthday celebration would be a night of fire and change. He closed his eyes, sensing the mana flowing through the dark forest. The power of the wyverns and the loyalty of the assassins were his. He was ready to take everything that had been denied to him. The dawn rose, casting light on the ruins of the enemy blockade. Blizzard stood tall, watching his army march toward the capital gates. The game of politics was over, and the era of conquest began. He would show the king the true meaning of a royal gift, and he would ensure that no one ever dared to block his path. The legend of the Blizzard had only just begun to be written. He rode toward the horizon where the throne of Gaia awaited him. The future of the kingdom rested in the hands of the exile. He smiled, knowing that the world was finally ready for his return. The Baron surveyed his squad of assassins, noting the cold steel in their eyes. He signaled for the march toward the capital to begin as the sun touched the horizon. Every man knew that the road ahead would be stained with blood. The Baron kept his gaze forward, ignoring the flicker of hesitation in the ranks. He intended to show the kingdom exactly what he had become. The first checkpoint appeared in the distance, guarded by the men of Roxlin. Blizzard raised his hand, signaling his forces to prepare for combat. The silence of the forest broke under the sudden ring of drawn steel. He watched as his knights charged, overwhelming the surprised guards in a flurry of motion. The blockade crumbled in minutes under the crushing weight of his assault. He did not stop, pushing his men further toward the heart of the city of Tat. The enemy commanders scrambled, realizing their trap had already been shattered. Blizzard rode at the front, his presence commanding the entire field of battle. He knew that the true war would start at the feet of the king. The path to becoming a duke was always stained with the blood of fools. He whispered to his horse that the capital would soon know his name. The cavalry galloped onward, leaving a trail of dust and defeated soldiers behind. The journey to the birthday celebration had officially turned into a crusade. Blizzard felt the cold resolve of his past life returning to his veins. He was no longer just a baron of a small, forgotten province. He was the storm that would soon swallow the entire kingdom whole. The guards at the city gates watched the approaching army with mounting dread. They recognized the banner of the Blizzard, a sign of certain doom. The Baron did not slow down, forcing the heavy iron gates to swing wide. He entered the city of Tat as a conqueror, not a guest. His eyes scanned the streets, looking for any sign of the coward Roxlin. He knew the man was hiding, waiting for the king's protection behind stone walls. Blizzard would not give him that luxury tonight. The hunt for the Duke's lapdog had begun in earnest. He ordered his men to secure the perimeter and wait for his next command. The city fell silent, the citizens hiding behind locked wooden doors. He walked through the center square, his footsteps echoing on the cold stone. He found the governor's manor standing tall at the city's dark heart. The Baron drew his sword, the metal gleaming under the pale moonlight. He kicked the heavy doors open, revealing a hallway lined with trembling guards. They shook at the sight of the man they had been told to stop. Blizzard moved with the grace of a predator, striking with lethal, focused intent. He cleared the path to the inner chambers in a matter of seconds. Roxlin stood on the balcony, trapped by the encroaching shadows of his own past. The Baron stepped into the light, his face devoid of any mercy. He asked the man if he truly thought a simple road could stop him. Roxlin stammered, his voice failing as he looked at the bloodied blade. Blizzard did not wait for an answer, ending the conversation with a single strike. The territorial war was over before the king even knew it began. He wiped his blade clean, satisfied with the brutal speed of his victory. His eyes turned back toward the capital, his ultimate goal finally in sight. The king's birthday would be the stage for his final, glorious ascent. He gathered his men, preparing to continue the journey at the first light of dawn. The province of Carolyn was no longer a secret, but a massive threat. He stepped back into the night, the master of his own dark fate. The world would soon realize that the strongest mage had finally returned. He looked at the communication stone, waiting for a sign from the Princess Esild. He knew the royal lady would be watching his next move with keen interest. The path ahead was clear, and he would walk it with absolute power. He was the Baron, the Mage, and the soon-to-be Duke of Gaia. The king's birthday celebration would be a night of fire and permanent change. He closed his eyes, sensing the raw mana flowing through the dark forest. The power of the wyverns and the loyalty of the assassins were his. He was ready to take everything that had been denied to him for years. The dawn rose, casting a harsh light on the ruins of the enemy blockade. Blizzard stood tall, watching his army march toward the distant capital gates. The game of politics was over, and the era of conquest had begun. He would show the king the true meaning of a royal gift. He would ensure that no one ever dared to block his path again. The legend of the Blizzard had only just begun to be written in blood. He rode toward the horizon where the throne of Gaia awaited his arrival. The future of the kingdom rested in the hands of the exiled Baron. He smiled, knowing that the world was finally ready for his return. The Baron turned to his subordinates and demanded a status report. He insisted that news of the conflict only reach the public after the enemy surrendered. Blizzard believed this was the perfect chance to test his prepared forces. He ordered Short to leave only minimal units in the territory and prepare for departure. The protagonist declared that the assassin squad would remain on standby for now. He commanded that Miller be sent immediately to scout the city of Tot. Blizzard told Jake to prepare the elite wyvern squad for the upcoming journey. Jake stood frozen in place, his eyes wide with clear surprise. He reminded the Baron that there were only 20 men in the entire squad. He questioned if that was truly enough to participate in a full war for territory. The Baron looked at the commander and asked if he truly led the Wyvern Knights. Blizzard asked if Jake still lacked trust in the power of the beasts. Jake bowed his head, admitting that the commander was right. He agreed that the Wyverns were not weak and were ready for battle. They would soon show their rivals the full extent of their hidden strength. The Baron commanded Jerome to prepare an official announcement regarding the war. He wanted the proclamation to address the tyranny over the people of Carolyn. Jerome refused, stating that this was a gamble with an unpredictable outcome. The strategist warned that one cannot risk lives so recklessly in war. Jerome noted that Viscount Roxlin still held 6,000 unevicted citizens hostage. He warned that if they attacked first, the innocent hostages would be in danger. Furthermore, the forces of the city of Tat outnumbered those of Carolyn tenfold. If Tat received the support of Duke Icarus, the Baron would face ruin. The protagonist claimed that before his rivals could respond, he would end the war. He insisted that the conflict would be resolved in just 2 days. Jerome shook his head, stating that this feat was practically impossible. Blizzard reminded him that a strategist should never show doubt before his troops. Jerome wondered silently if the Baron could exceed expectations and work another miracle. The Baron ordered a banner for Lilith to be prepared for his address to the soldiers. He intended to declare war against the corruption of the local lords. Bound prisoners were moved across the square, prodded by guards with spears. One prisoner dared to ask the reason for their cruel arrest. A knight struck the prisoner in the neck with his spear shaft. The guard barked that he acted on the orders of the Viscount to arrest all from Carolyn. An assistant reported to the Viscount that all inhabitants had been detained as ordered. The assistant added that the merchants no longer appeared at the castle gates. The Viscount sneered, saying that those fools had finally understood the situation. He refused to open the gates to any supplies from the outside world. Without food, the icebound land of Carolyn would surely collapse and perish. The mountainous terrain made it impossible to reach the capital without passing through Tot. The people of Carolyn were likely starving under the weight of the blockade. The Viscount added that a meeting of the nobility would soon be held. Attendance was required for every lord in the surrounding provinces. If Baron Blizzard did not appear at the king's birthday, he would lose his title. Roxlin grinned, thinking he would easily capture Carolyn once the title was revoked. The Viscount considered this the perfect plan to expand his own domain. Roxlin noted that opposing Duke Icarus, who held more power than the king, was treason. If everything went according to plan, he could finally earn the title of Marquis. The Viscount glanced toward the window and noticed a shadow flicker past the glass. He blinked, wondering if his eyes had deceived him in the dim light. A huge, leathery shadow suddenly blotted out the moonlight outside the window. The glass shattered inward, and Roxlin stared at a massive wyvern perched before him. He wondered where such a creature came from, as they only lived beyond the ridge. Baron Blizzard sat atop the beast and asked if the man was indeed Roxlin. The Viscount demanded to know the name of the intruder who dared threaten him. The protagonist replied calmly that he was Lord Caroluna of the North. The Viscount recognized the man as the disgraced Baron Blizzard. The protagonist threw a heavy sealed scroll at the feet of the terrified Roxlin. Blizzard stated that the document was a formal declaration of war. He added that he would return in 1 hour to finish their business. The guards rushed into the room, swords drawn, asking if the Viscount was safe. The protagonist soared into the sky, distancing himself from the crumbling castle walls. The captain of the guards stared upward, shocked by the sight of the wyvern. The Viscount began to beat the captain, calling him a useless, overpaid coward. He demanded to know where the guards were when the enemy attacked the room. Roxlin ordered the scroll to be burned immediately in the fireplace. He told his men to dress the Tot prisoners in military uniforms and issue weapons. The Viscount wanted to see the look on Blizzard's face when he destroyed his own people. Roxlin declared that the Baron must be held accountable for this act of war. He ordered the Knights of Tot to be notified of the extraordinary event. The Viscount shouted that he was declaring war on the province of Carolyn. He promised a generous reward to any soldier who distinguished themselves in the fight. The knights cheered, inspired by the promise of gold and status. Behind the Viscount, a knight stood silently, clutching a crystal for communication. He held the device close, secretly transmitting the words to Blizzard. The Baron, riding high on his wyvern, heard every word of the plot. Soldiers stood on the fortress wall, ready to repel the coming attack. Below the walls, a crowd of confused prisoners stood in the square. They were armed against their will and puzzled by the unfolding chaos. Roxlin waited for the Baron to give the order to destroy his own kin. He wanted to watch the hero drown in the despair of his own actions. Baron Blizzard, at the head of his army, prepared to storm the city. The prisoners looked up, surprised to see huge winged shapes approaching the walls. Roxlin watched in horror as the squadron of wyverns descended upon the city. Huge stones fell from the sky, dropped by the beasts to crush the gates. The mage among the prisoners activated a defensive barrier to protect the innocents. Jerome told the knights that the soldiers on the walls were residents of Carolyn. He ordered them to be evacuated to a safe place immediately. Max and his squad penetrated the destroyed wall with explosive speed. The commander shouted that they would show the army of Tot the power of Carolyn. Roxlin was furious, wondering how the Baron knew about the prisoners behind the gates. He questioned when Carolyn had become such a formidable military power. Carolyn's knights flew toward their opponents on ice wyverns, striking terror into the enemy. The soldiers looked at the protagonist, unable to comprehend his sudden presence. They wondered if he was truly fighting this entire war alone. The order was given to attack the Baron with everything they had. Baron Blizzard used his unique abilities to conjure massive blocks of ice. He crushed the enemy knights, leaving the survivors trembling in fear. Roxlin screamed at his men, demanding they fight the intruder immediately. The Viscount sent a desperate messenger to Duke Icarus, begging for reinforcements. He believed that if they held out until the Duke arrived, victory was assured. The guards turned and began to flee, abandoning their posts in the confusion. They shouted that the Viscount could stay and die alone if he wished. Roxlin ordered them to return, but his commands were ignored by the cowards. The Viscount looked up to see a massive wyvern landing directly in front of him. Baron Blizzard told Lilith to stop eating the garbage, or she would get indigestion. The Viscount was shocked to see his rival standing before him in the flesh. Roxlin knelt, admitting his defeat and begging for mercy from the Baron. He claimed he could not disobey the orders of Duke Icarus. The squad commander reported that they had captured the messenger heading to the Duke. Blizzard noted the irony of the Viscount's lies, knowing he believed none of them. The protagonist said that Roxlin would pay for daring to oppress the people. The Baron swung his fist, but the blow was blocked by an invisible wall. Blizzard looked at Jerome, wondering why his own strategist intervened. The Mage stood between them, having used his power to shield the Viscount. Jerome insisted that even a criminal aristocrat deserved a trial before the king. He warned that if the Baron killed him, their political situation would worsen. Roxlin agreed, thinking that the Baron was finally cornered by the law. He looked toward the horizon, whispering that his reinforcements had arrived. Knight Wulmer approached the rivals, his armor gleaming in the sun. Roxlin laughed, asking if the Baron truly thought he only contacted the Duke. He explained that territorial wars must be supervised by a royal representative. Roxlin sneered that the Baron failed to report the war to the royal court. He claimed his plans would collapse due to the Baron's arrogant mistakes. Jerome looked worried, wondering how Wulmer had slipped past their blockade. Blizzard smiled, saying that Wulmer could finally reveal his true colors. Jerome and Roxlin stared in shock as the knight removed his helmet. The face underneath was not Wulmer, but the Baron's scout, Miller. Roxlin did not understand how this deception had taken place. Miller confirmed that he had carried out the Baron's orders to the letter. Blizzard noted that the law allowed for attacks without notice against violators. Roxlin had sold the inhabitants of Carolyn into slavery, which was strictly prohibited. The Viscount turned pale, realizing his long-held position was now forfeit. He understood that if he lost his lands and title, Duke Icarus would destroy him. The Viscount turned and ran, shouting that he did not want to die. The Baron used his power, freezing the Viscount's feet to the hard ground. Blizzard approached the man, swung his fist, and told him to be silent. Roxlin fell to the dirt, his jaw broken by the force of the strike. Baron Blizzard declared that the province of Carolyn had won the war. The transition of power went smoothly in the following days. Roxlin, having lost his status and wealth, was expelled from his estates. A few days later, the disgraced Viscount disappeared without a trace. The territory of Todd was officially annexed to Carolyn. Baron Blizzard gestured for Jerome to take control of the new district. Jerome shook his head, warning the Baron that his workload was already at its limit. He threatened to go on strike if the Baron added any more duties to his plate. The Baron sighed and asked who should take the position instead. Count Jerome smiled and suggested that he had the perfect candidate for the job. On Jerome's recommendation, the former vassal of Roxlin named Wulmer took the post. Baron Blizzard remained wary of the man's true loyalties. He assigned 2 of his most trusted knights to monitor Wulmer's daily reports. The day of King Tomaloff III's 50th birthday finally arrived. Guards stood at the palace gates, watching the festivities from a distance. They hoped for a generous reward for their vigilance during the celebration. One guard squinted at the sky, wondering about the sudden shadow overhead. The knights gazed upward and spotted a massive wyvern circling the palace. The guards shouted that monsters were invading the city walls. They scrambled to sound the alarm and mobilize the city defenses. Baron Blizzard descended from the back of the wyvern to the courtyard. He ordered the frantic guards to lower their weapons and remain calm. He announced clearly that he was the Lord of Carolyn. The guards whispered among themselves, recognizing the famous magical swordsman. They recalled the tales of the man who saved their majesty's life. The Baron informed them that he had arrived as a formal guest. Inside the palace, guests mingled in the grand ballroom. Young nobles waited impatiently for the royal celebration to commence. A servant stepped forward and announced the arrival of Baron Blizzard. The ladies in the room turned, noting the Baron's striking appearance. They gossiped about his heroics and his mastery of fifth circle magic. Schiller McMahon approached the Baron, offering a warm greeting. The princess asked how the Baron had been faring lately. Blizzard responded that everything was proceeding according to plan. A short silence fell between them as the Baron failed to return the pleasantry. Schiller looked surprised, wondering why he did not ask about her well-being. The Baron offered the princess a glass of champagne to fill the void. He mentioned that his assistant insisted girls should always be served first. A servant announced the arrival of Princess Daphne from the Kingdom of Heisen. Count Anos walked into the hall alongside the princess. Blizzard observed that Princess Daphne's beauty remained as radiant as ever. The crowd whispered that the two of them made a perfect couple. Blizzard recalled the name from Edmund's letter, identifying Anos as a master of the sword. Schiller tilted her head and asked if the two men knew each other. A strange sensation washed over the hero as he studied the count. He suspected that Anos did not belong to this world. Blizzard replied to the princess that he had never met the man. Schiller glanced around, asking if the woman he arrived with last time was absent. Blizzard asked if the princess was truly curious about his companion. He told her to wait, noting that she always loved a dramatic entrance. A servant announced the arrival of His Majesty, King Tomaloff III. The king entered the hall, flanked by his royal daughters. Schiller gasped, wondering if the mystery woman was the princess of the Kingdom of Drake. She whispered to the Baron, asking if this was the dramatic entrance he promised. Asild spotted the Baron and waved enthusiastically toward him. The Baron was not alone, standing beside his companion. Asild frowned, confused and indignant about the woman's presence. She had expected the first princess, Gaia, to be the one arriving. The guests bowed and began to congratulate the king on his birthday. The king thanked the assembly for their presence and their kind words. Tomaloff III expressed his sincere hope that everyone would enjoy the night. The princess clapped her hands, excited to see what gifts her father would receive. A servant announced a gift from Duke Icarus to His Majesty. The Duke stepped forward, holding a small, velvet-covered box. He opened the lid to reveal a ring set with a precious, glowing stone. Icarus claimed the ring would serve as a shield for His Majesty. He explained that it could neutralize any offensive magic below the 9th circle. Schiller studied the artifact, noting the immense amount of magic imbued within it. The king slid the ring onto his finger, feeling the power resonate. No magic existed above the 9th circle, making the ring a priceless relic. His Majesty thanked the Duke for such a rare and generous offering. Icarus bowed low, repeating his congratulations to the king. The audience murmured, convinced that no gift could possibly surpass this one. A servant announced the final gift, coming from Baron Blizzard. The Baron knelt before the king and asked if he had been eating well. The king chuckled, stating he was glad to see the Baron in good health. Blizzard opened his box, announcing a gift prepared specifically for this occasion. He presented the skin of an ice ogre he had hunted himself. The king asked if he referred to the ferocious monsters of the north. The Baron nodded, asking the king to accept it as a sign of his sincerity. The king smiled, promising to craft winter clothes from the thick hide. Duke Icarus scoffed, thinking it poor form to bring such a primitive gift. He judged the Baron to be of low birth and lacking in refinement. Blizzard noted that the skin alone seemed insufficient for the king. He reached into the box and pulled out several strange, heavy objects. The king and the princesses leaned in, eager to see what lay inside. His Majesty stared at the objects, unable to identify them. Baron Blizzard announced that they were eggs of an ice wyvern. The hall erupted in shock, with many guests openly shouting their outrage. Duke Icarus stood up, declaring the gift an insult to the royal family. He signaled the guards to remove the insolent Baron from the palace. The king raised a hand, ordering the guards to stand down immediately. He asked the Baron to explain his true intentions behind this offer. Blizzard revealed that they were the rare eggs of a northern ice wyvern. He explained that taming these beasts had been considered impossible for centuries. He argued that a domesticated wyvern would bolster the kingdom's military power. The king thanked the Baron, though he worried about the difficulty of hatching them. Blizzard agreed, noting that raising a hatchling required specific knowledge. He called out to Lilith, and a massive shadow swept across the windows. The guests gasped as the silhouette of a full-grown wyvern blocked the light. Blizzard explained that he had raised her from birth. He offered to train the royal handlers in the same techniques he used. He claimed that if the cub saw the king first, it would view him as a parent. He presented 2 eggs specifically for the royal princesses to keep. The king was touched, realizing the baron had considered his daughter's safety. He praised the baron's thoughtfulness and dedication to the crown. The king remarked that the kingdom was now 1 step closer to imperial power. He declared it the greatest gift he had ever received. The princess smiled, finally understanding why the baron told her to wait. Duke Icarus narrowed his eyes, wondering how Blizzard obtained such rare treasures. He stepped forward, claiming he had something urgent to report. He told the king that 2 days ago, Blizzard sent forces against the domain of Todd. The king looked at the baron, surprised by the sudden news of conflict. Icarus explained that the baron had initiated an unauthorized territorial war. He demanded harsh punishment for the man who violated the kingdom's laws. The king hesitated, wondering how to handle such a complicated situation. Princess Asilde looked worried, fearing public opinion would turn against the baron. Duke Icarus smirked, certain that the baron would soon be dismissed. Blizzard remained calm and asked if slave trading was legal in the kingdom. The king replied firmly that the practice was strictly prohibited by law. Blizzard produced a scroll presenting evidence of Roxlin's involvement in the slave trade. The guests gasped, shocked by the revelation of the Viscount's crimes. Blizzard explained that Roxlin had been capturing his own people for profit. He questioned how any loyal lord could remain silent about such atrocities. Duke Icarus paled, realizing the Viscount had dragged him into a scandal. The princess declared that war was permitted against any who broke the law. The king nodded, agreeing that the justification was more than sufficient. He announced he would make an exception and waive any formal punishment. He ordered the lands of Todd to be officially annexed to Carolyn. Count Anno suggested that the baron deserved a title for his expanded territory. The king agreed, summoning the baron to stand before the throne. He announced that from this day forward he would be known as Viscount Blizzard. The king offered his congratulations, and the court applauded the promotion. Duke Icarus gritted his teeth, silently vowing to destroy the man. The protagonist stepped out onto the veranda to find a moment of peace. He regretted that the crowded hall prevented him from speaking with Asilde. He stood in the cool night air, finally finding a quiet space. A young man stepped out from the shadows behind him. The Viscount turned, asking the stranger to identify himself. The man was Count Anos from the Kingdom of Hyzen. Anos announced that he had finally tracked down Sol Mudok. The protagonist recognized the language of the Central Plains immediately. Anos closed the door, stating he had searched for his teacher's enemy for years. He drew his sword from its sheath, the steel glinting in the moonlight. Blizzard caught a distinct scent in the air, like blossoming plum trees. He remembered the final words of his fallen enemy from long ago. He realized this was the student John Pongjin had mentioned before his death. The man was known as the greatest talent in the Central Plains. Standing before the hero was Lie Chin Chong, the master of true purity. The 2 rivals crossed blades, their eyes locked in absolute focus. They exchanged blows in a fierce, rapid battle of skill. Neither man gained the upper hand as the night grew silent. Lie Chin Chong stands with his sword drawn, his eyes fixed on the protagonist. He warns Viscount Blizzard that he has spent 3 long years tracking him down. The swordsman describes how he hid on the ship, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A sudden, violent storm had disrupted his plans and knocked him off balance. He declares that his thirst for revenge has not faded for a single day. The Master of Purity vows to finally behead his enemy here on the veranda. He raises his blade, his aura flaring with the heat of a volcano. Viscount Blizzard observes the unique technique and recognizes a dangerous new level of skill. The veranda door swings open, and Princess Schiller steps into the moonlight. She announces that she has been searching everywhere for the Viscount. The princess glances between the 2 men, asking why they remain alone in the dark. Blizzard explains calmly that he just reconnected with an old friend from his homeland. Lie Chin Chong studies the princess, identifying her as the 2nd princess of Gaia. He calculates the risks of fighting in front of royalty and decides to retreat. The swordsman offers a stiff apology and turns to walk away into the night. Schiller watches him depart, turning her attention back to the young nobleman. As he walks, Lie Chin Chong silently swears to destroy everything the Viscount holds dear. He promises to target the Viscount's loved ones, starting with the Princess of Drake. Blizzard senses the hostile intent and projects a warning into his rival's mind. He tells the swordsman that the princess has no part in their private conflict. Lai Chin-chong ignores the warning, signaling that the outcome depends entirely on Blizzard. Schiller observes the tension and asks what truly transpired during their brief conversation. The Viscount replies that he must leave immediately to attend to urgent business. The princess reaches out and grabs the hem of his coat to stop him. She reprimands him, calling his sudden departure rude after she went to such effort. Blizzard asks if the princess truly has nothing better to do with her evening. He points out the many honored guests gathered inside to celebrate the king's birthday. The Viscount questions why the representative of Gaia insists on following him everywhere. Schiller feels a sting of confusion, wondering why this man treats her with such indifference. She claims she only wanted to offer her formal congratulations on his new title. Blizzard offers a curt thanks, apologizes for his haste, and turns to walk away. The princess watches his retreating back, her gaze drifting toward Princess Isolde nearby. She wonders if she might have captured his interest had they met under different circumstances. Schiller shakes off the thought, reminding herself that she must focus on her own survival. She needs to escape the schemes of her sister and return to her kingdom. Her eyes scan the garden and land upon Princess Daphne talking to a young man. She recognizes the man standing beside the princess as Jerome, the Viscount's assistant. Inside the palace, Jerome reports to the Count that the princess remains missing. Count Anos expresses his frustration, ordering the search to continue without delay. Daphne leans against a stone pillar, recalling the order to serve as an ambassador. She remembers being forced into this position by her brother's cold decree. Jerome approaches the corner, startling the princess as he steps into the light. He bows low, apologizing for his intrusion at such a late hour. Daphne relaxes, noting with a soft smile that the young man is quite handsome. Jerome introduces himself as the humble assistant to the new Viscount. The princess offers her name, Daphne Lair, and watches the assistant's face light up. He recognizes the name immediately, recalling the fame of the Heisen beauty. Jerome kneels in the grass, begging forgiveness for his earlier ignorance. Daphne tells him to rise, showing no concern for the breach of etiquette. The assistant notes the sadness in her eyes and asks to sit beside her. He explains he is waiting for his master to finish with the royal guests. Daphne nods, blushing slightly as she invites him to stay for a while. Jerome speaks of his life, describing how he spends his days cleaning up his master's messes. The princess listens, remarking that he seems to harbor many unspoken feelings for the lord. Jerome asks why she spoke of wanting to run away earlier that evening. Daphne confesses that her brother is forcing her into a marriage of convenience. She laments that she does not want to sacrifice her life for political gain. The assistant asks if a simple servant can use his mana to assist her. Daphne's heart begins to race, and she turns away to hide her sudden blush. She thanks him for the kind words, but a voice cuts through the air. Count Anos arrives, his eyes narrowing as he spots the assistant near the princess. He demands to know the identity of the man standing with his charge. Jerome bows, identifying himself as a passing magician before stepping back. He recognizes the legendary master swordsman standing before him and retreats into the shadows. Daphne calls out a quiet goodbye as the Count pulls her away. Anos reminds her of the grand ceremony planned for the end of the holiday. He tells her that she must learn to open her heart to their future. Jerome watches them leave, promising himself that they will meet again in 3 days. The princess follows the Count, while the assistant remains alone in the garden. Inside the hall, Viscount Blizzard holds out his hand to Princess Isolde. He invites her to dance, and she accepts with a graceful, knowing smile. They move together across the floor, lost in the rhythm of the music. The king watches them from the throne, leaning toward Count Cotton. He asks if the two are truly close, or if it is merely a trick of the light. Cotton agrees that the intimacy between them seems quite apparent. The king notes that he has not seen his daughter smile so brightly in years. He asks if the Count believes Isolde has developed real feelings for the Viscount. Cotton warns that the Viscount is a commoner who recently rose to power. He argues that a relationship with a princess is unthinkable for a man of his status. The Count insists that even the greatest combat skills cannot bridge the gap of birth. He advises the king not to entertain any foolish futile hopes for the pair. High above the city, the ice wyvern circles, casting a massive shadow over the streets. Blizzard meets with Edmund, who glows with the success of his thriving merchant guild. The merchant leader confirms he has become the wealthiest trader in the entire kingdom. The protagonist requests the acquisition of a mansion that surpasses the splendor of Icarus's estate. Edmund nods, promising to prepare the purchase with absolute haste. He watches the Viscount leave, realizing the magical swordsman has finally begun his true campaign. Edmund smiles, knowing they now have the power to crush the Akasa trading house. He prepares to help the Viscount dismantle Duke Icarus and claim his place at the top. The guild leader questions why the young swordsman stands alone in the room. He asks where the servant has disappeared to at this hour. Blizzard explains that Jerome is currently occupied with a special assignment. Across the city, Jerome sits inside a quiet, dimly lit cafe. He holds a secret mission to uncover the truth behind the Miller family's destruction. The servant wonders why such a heavy burden rests upon his shoulders. His thoughts drift to Princess Daphne and their promised meeting in 3 days. A young man approaches the table and expresses genuine surprise at the sight of him. He notes that rumors of Jerome's disappearance had spread throughout the capital. Jerome looks up to find Leon standing directly beside him. The two men acknowledge the long time that has passed since their last encounter. Jerome flashes a grin and remarks that his face is too handsome for him to die. Leon sighs, noting that the prince's deep-seated complex remains unchanged. The information broker asks for the nature of the inquiry that brought Jerome here. Jerome slides a heavy bag filled with gold and jewels across the wooden table. Leon warns that the target will be under heavy surveillance. He asks if the person in question is someone of high importance. Jerome admits he is merely fulfilling a request and lacks the finer details. Leon demands the target's name before he agrees to take the job. Jerome speaks the name clearly, identifying the target as Miller Kramer. Leon's expression shifts as he realizes why the payment is so substantial. He reveals that every person who previously investigated the Kramer family's death has perished. Jerome confesses that he heard nothing of these past tragedies. Leon suggests they pretend this conversation never took place for their own safety. Jerome offers to double the payment if the information is successfully retrieved. Leon pauses, considering that a decade has passed since the incident occurred. He agrees to see what he can uncover regarding the old mystery. Jerome sits alone and wonders what fate truly befell the Kramer family. He realizes that if the head of the Information Guild fears the case, the danger is immense. Jerome later reports the findings to his master. He explains that Miller was the second son of the influential Kramer earldom. 10 years ago, the entire family suffered through a brutal poisoning. Only Miller survived the calculated massacre. Blizzard asks if the killers were ever brought to justice for their crimes. Jerome replies that a man named Baron Gideon was the primary suspect. Edmund, the guild leader, interjects to suggest that Gideon was merely a puppet. He claims there is a hidden culprit who orchestrated the entire poisoning. Miller stands nearby, declaring his intent to hunt down Baron Gideon today. He wishes to complete his long-awaited revenge against the man who destroyed his life. Blizzard asks why the young man chooses such a volatile time for action. Edmund reveals that he remembers Miller from when he was just a small boy. He introduces himself as the guild master who once received support from Count Kramer. Edmund explains that Baron Gideon acted under the direct orders of Duke Icarus. Miller stares in shock, unable to process the betrayal of his former employer. He asks how Icarus could possibly benefit from his family's disappearance. Edmund explains that the Asa Trading Association belongs to Duke Icarus. The Duke needed to eliminate successful rivals like the Rowe and Kramer houses to grow his influence. Miller trembles with rage, realizing he served the very man who ruined his legacy. Blizzard asks where the young man intends to go in his current state. Miller announces his plan to march forward and destroy Duke Icarus. Blizzard blocks his path, stating that Miller lacks the skill to defeat a master swordsman. Miller asserts that he does not care about the odds of survival. Blizzard declares that if Miller wants to leave, he must first defeat him. The assassin lunges forward with a sharp, lethal strike. Blizzard dodges the attack with a fluid, effortless motion. He observes that Miller aims for vital points with surprisingly economical movements. The protagonist realizes the boy has trained diligently for this exact moment. Blizzard taps a specific pressure point on Miller's neck with his finger. He states that the assassin will be unable to move for the next half a day. Miller collapses to the floor, struggling to stabilize his ragged breathing. The boy begins to manipulate his own pressure points to force a recovery. Blizzard watches in surprise, as he never revealed those secrets to the student. Miller asks if the magical swordsman thought the techniques were hidden from him. Blizzard realizes the boy copied his movements after seeing them only once. Miller tries to rise again, but his body finally gives out from exhaustion. He loses consciousness and falls into a deep slumber on the floor. Blizzard instructs Edmund to carry the young man to a private room. He decides that starting tomorrow, he will personally train Miller in the art of vital strikes. The protagonist smiles, knowing he has found an uncut diamond with immense potential. A sudden, sharp chime rings out from the communication stone at his side. Princess Isolde's voice comes through, desperate and shivering from the cold. She cries out for help, trapped within a freezing, isolated location. Blizzard feels a spike of alarm and demands to know her exact coordinates. The connection cuts to silence, leaving the room cold and empty. Blizzard leaps through the open window, racing toward the palace grounds. He scans the surrounding space with his inner vision to detect magical fluctuations. His mind locks onto a location radiating an unnatural, icy aura. He bursts into the room where the rare wyvern eggs are stored. Princess Isolde huddles on the floor, shivering violently as frost coats her hair. Blizzard gathers the princess into his arms and carries her out of the chamber. He asks why she was locked inside such a dangerous, freezing place. Isolde explains she only wanted to check on the ice wyvern egg. She became trapped when the heavy doors sealed shut behind her. Blizzard reminds her that he warned her about the cooling spells on the barn. Isolde apologizes for her recklessness and thanks him for coming to her aid. Blizzard pulls her closer, vowing that he will never lose her again. They look toward the incubator as the eggs begin to tremble and glow. One shell cracks open, revealing a tiny, shivering wyvern cub. Blizzard tells the princess to wipe the slime from the creature's body. He explains that the cub will recognize her as its mother if she touches it first. Isolde cleans the baby, noting that its skin feels soft and fluffy. She asks if the little creature remembers her presence. Blizzard tells her to introduce herself to the new arrival. Isolde greets the cub, which responds with a happy musical purr. She hugs the baby wyvern, marveling at how cute it appears. Blizzard observes the creature and suggests that it is a female. Isolde asks in surprise how he can determine its sex so easily. Blizzard explains that ice wyverns are sexed by their cloaca, similar to chickens. He tells her to take good care of the beast as it was born healthy. Isolde smiles, promising to raise the wyvern to be beautiful and strong. She asks the protagonist for help in choosing a name for the baby. Blizzard encourages her to make the choice herself. A maid watches the movement near the barn from a distant, shadowed window. Following the king's birthday, a solemn ceremony is held to award new titles. The king summons Blizzard to the center of the royal hall. His Majesty officially names the young man the Viscount of the Kingdom of Drake. Saul Mudok finally receives his title and stands before the court. A grand council of state is announced to discuss the kingdom's future. Aristocrats from every corner of the realm gather to fill the hall. The king places the election of the small council at the top of the agenda. He asks the gathered nobles to nominate candidates for the prestigious position. One official immediately recommends the influential Duke Icarus. Another voice calls out a nomination for Count Slave. Blizzard watches the proceedings, noting the clear divide in the balance of power. He recognizes who belongs to Icarus's inner circle and who remains loyal to the crown. As a new Viscount, Blizzard has no allies to put his name forward. However, Duke Icarus stands and surprises the room with his own recommendation. He praises Blizzard's abilities and nominates him for the small council. The proposal receives support from the assembly without a single objection. Princess Isolde watches from the sidelines, suspecting the Duke's hidden motives. She wonders why he sent the Viscount north only to elevate him now. By unanimous decision, Blizzard is officially elected to the small council. The Duke offers a cold, insincere congratulation to the new member. Blizzard realizes that weekly council meetings will keep him trapped in the capital. The Duke believes he has effectively neutralized the man who threatened his influence. He smiles, knowing he can now keep a close watch on the Viscount's every move. After the session, Isolde signals for Blizzard to meet her in her private chambers. The Viscount appears at her window, entering the room with his usual grace. He asks the princess why she requested this secret meeting. Isolde asks why the Duke would possibly recommend him for such a position. Blizzard admits he does not know the true reason behind the gesture. The princess states that she cannot believe the Duke acts without a selfish design. She reminds him that this man once sent assassins to kill her father. She warns that Icarus is a monster who will stop at nothing to win. The two stand in the moonlight, planning their next move against the coming storm. Princess Isolde reminds the Viscount to remain cautious during his time at court. She notes with a smile that his new council seat guarantees they will see one another more often. Blizzard assures her that he will handle Duke Icarus as he always does. He tells her there is no need for such excessive worry. A sharp knock echoes against the heavy wooden door. A maid asks for permission to enter the private chambers. Princess Isolde commands the Viscount to hide immediately. He slips through the open window and vanishes into the night. 10 days earlier, Princess Daphne approached Jerome during a secret meeting. She confessed her desperate desire to escape the confines of her life. Jerome stared at her in shock, wondering where she could possibly hide. Daphne pleaded for him to take her somewhere she would never be recognized. The servant reminded her that he served Lord Corellon. He warned that helping a royal escape could ignite a war between their nations. Daphne countered by asking if the Count's previous promises were merely lies. Jerome stood frozen, surprised by her pointed accusation. She reminded him that he had sworn to use his mana to aid her. Daphne revealed this was the first time she had ever stepped outside her kingdom. She spoke of how her brother locked her away after their father's death. The princess lamented that she was only permitted to attend formal ceremonies. She described a life of beautiful gowns and fine food, but no freedom. A political engagement to Kontos had been forced upon her by the royal line. She explained that he was nothing more than her brother's loyal hound. The man never cared for her thoughts or her secret heart. She looked at Sir Jerome and admitted he was the only one who saw her differently. Daphne apologized for causing him such inconvenience with her naive requests. Tears welled in her eyes as she prepared to say goodbye. Jerome stood indecisive, his face clouded by heavy doubt. He told her that such a plan would never work in the end. The princess rushed to him, grabbing his hands in a frantic plea. She demanded to know if he would help her or not. She insisted that he only needed to say a single word. Jerome watched the princess's expression shift from despair to resolve. He finally nodded, promising he would do everything in his power. Daphne thanked him, her face lighting up with newfound hope. Jerome promised to send word regarding their meeting place. 10 days passed in silence between the two conspirators. He instructed her to wait at sunset on the 3rd floor of the Blue Cat Tavern. He warned that the location sat east of the castle walls. They agreed that no one must ever discover their secret arrangement. Jerome entered the Viscount's office to report on his upcoming inspection. Blizzard looked up from his desk and asked what business required his attention. The servant claimed he needed to travel alone for a routine check. He insisted he must verify how Woolmer was handling the estate management. Blizzard agreed that supervision was important for the territory. He ordered Jerome to head out before the next council meeting. Jerome hesitated, noting that the journey would take 5 days on horseback. He pointed out that this would force the Viscount to attend the council alone. The servant promised to draft a full report upon his return. Blizzard remarked that the trip would only take 1 day by wyvern. Jerome blinked, suddenly remembering the creatures existed. He realized he had completely forgotten about the flying beasts. Blizzard watched him closely and asked what was wrong. He noted that Jerome had not been himself all week. The servant replied that he was perfectly fine. Blizzard ordered his assistant to deal with Todd while he was away. Jerome exited the office and walked down the cold hallway. He told himself that everything would work out tomorrow. He thought that refusing the princess would have been madness. The young man felt he had to stop the plan immediately. Then, the image of the princess's tearful face flashed through his mind. Princess Isolde sat in her room, lost in deep thought. She wondered what Duke Icarus was truly planning. There was no logical reason for him to recommend a commoner to the council. She trusted that if Blizzard said he could handle it, then all would be well. The heavy doors swung open with a loud creak. A herald announced the arrival of His Majesty Tomalov III and Princess S. The princess smiled briefly when she caught the Viscount's gaze across the room. The presiding official announced the commencement of the small council meeting. The first item on the agenda was the official status of Duke Icarus. Icarus stepped forward and addressed the assembly with a cold grin. The Duke claimed his primary concern was the marriage of Her Highness. The princess jumped from her seat in total disbelief. She wondered what her personal marriage had to do with the Duke's agenda. Icarus apologized if the topic seemed sudden to the princess. He noted that she had already turned 20 years old this year. The Duke added that not a single proposal had been made for her hand. He claimed such a situation had never occurred in any previous royal family. Icarus stated he feared the royal lineage might be permanently interrupted. He officially insisted on speeding up Her Highness's marriage to secure the throne. One council member stood up, clearly outraged by the Duke's words. He shouted that the Duke was using false concern to manipulate the crown. A supporter of Icarus glared at the man and told him to watch his tongue. The Duke stood firm, claiming he spoke only for the future of the kingdom. The presiding count's slave called for silence across the hall. The princess snatched the wooden gavel from the count's hand. She smashed the hammer against the table with a loud crack. Isolde shouted for every noble in the room to be quiet. She apologized to the assembly and suggested they resume the meeting. She looked at her father, confused by his total silence. The king ordered his daughter to sit back down in her chair. The princess stared at him, stunned by his cold command. She wondered if His Majesty truly agreed with the Duke's scheme. She reminded herself that the king promised she could choose her own husband. Tomalov III declared that such was the fate of all royal children. He told his daughter to stop her childish and disruptive behavior. The princess turned and headed toward the exit. Count Slave reminded her that the meeting was not yet over. The upset princess reached the hallway and asked her maid what she should do. She whispered that the only man she liked was Viscount Blizzard. The maid urged her to remain calm, as nothing was yet decided. She told the princess not to be so categorical or give up hope. The princess said they clearly wanted to marry her to Justin to steal the crown. She noted that 3 princesses in the Tomalov family held no right to inherit. Isolde added that Duke Icarus would do anything to achieve his goal. She thought she should just declare that no one but Blizzard would be her husband. The maid warned her not to rush and to maintain her royal dignity. Isolde grew indignant, asking how long she was expected to suffer. She declared that she could bear the pressure no longer. The maid begged her to reconsider, understanding the weight of her feelings. She warned that such an outburst would turn the kingdom upside down. Isolde told her maid to step aside and let her pass. She felt like her world was already collapsing from within. The door to the room opened suddenly. The maid stood frozen on the other side of the threshold. Viscount Blizzard stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. He asked the maid if she had been eavesdropping outside the chambers. He demanded to know whose spy she truly was. The maid claimed she was only cleaning the floor near the door. Isolde asked the Viscount why he was present in the hallway. Blizzard said he came because he was worried about her safety. He noted that the maid had been listening from outside the room. Isolde turned to the maid and asked if the Viscount spoke the truth. The maid repeated that she was only performing her cleaning duties. The princess remarked that she had never seen this servant before. She asked how the maid knew where the royal chambers were located. The maid apologized, claiming it was her first day in this wing. She insisted she was unfamiliar with the layout and had gotten lost. The princess told the maid she did not want to see her again. She warned that next time she would not let the transgression slide. The maid thanked the princess and promised to stay away. Isolde ordered her own attendant to keep a close eye on the servant. Blizzard asked if she really intended to let the woman go so easily. The princess replied that there was no reason to punish her yet. She wanted to discover who was truly behind the infiltration first. Blizzard asked if she had any specific suspects in mind. Isolde replied that only one person possessed such reach, Duke Icarus. She explained that most of the palace staff had been bribed by the Duke. She felt that no matter what she did, no one would oppose him. The Viscount realized the royal family's power was weaker than he imagined. He asked the princess what she intended to do next. She feared that if things continued, she would be forced to marry Justin. Blizzard told her not to worry about the Duke's plans. He promised he would talk to His Majesty himself. The Viscount said he had an idea to change the king's mind. Meanwhile, a squad of knights searched the estate grounds. The commander told his men that the princess could not have gone far. He ordered them to search every corner of the area. Daphne hid behind a stone pillar, holding her breath. She remained unnoticed as the soldiers passed by. Jerome waited for the fugitive at the appointed meeting place. He thought of the princess's tearful eyes and began to lose hope. The heavy door swung open, and Daphne appeared on the threshold. She asked how long he had been waiting for her. Jerome looked out the window and saw the knights searching the building. He realized they were scouring every room for the runaway royal. Daphne asked anxiously what they should do to escape. She feared they would surely be caught by the soldiers. Jerome blocked the door, but the princess said it would not stop them. He told her he had expected this and brought a secret solution. Outside, the knights hammered on the door and demanded entry. They assumed the princess was hiding inside the room. Jerome told the princess to hold on tight. Duke Icarus leaned forward, his gaze cold and calculating. He spoke of his deep concern for the continuity of the royal line. The Duke insisted that the princess must marry as soon as possible. A member of the small council slammed his hand against the table. He demanded to know how the Duke dared to speak such treason. Duke Icarus maintained his composure, claiming his only interest was the kingdom. Count Slave pounded his wooden hammer to restore order in the hall. Princess Isla snatched the hammer from his hand and struck the table. She shouted for the council to silence their voices immediately. The princess offered a brief apology before demanding the meeting proceed. She looked toward the throne, searching for her father's support. King Tomalov stared ahead, his expression unreadable and stern. He commanded his daughter to return to her seat at once. The princess realized with a jolt that her father sided with the Duke. She remembered his promise that she could choose her own husband. Tomalov dismissed her, calling her behavior childish and disruptive. He declared that this was the inevitable fate of all royal children. The princess turned her back on the council and walked toward the exit. Count Slave reminded her that the session was not yet concluded. Ailey reached the quiet hallway and grabbed her maid by the shoulders. She whispered that her heart belonged only to Viscount Blizzard. The maid urged her to remain calm while the situation was still fluid. She warned the princess not to give up or act too quickly. Ailey complained that they intended to marry her to Justin for the crown. She noted that the 3 Tomalov princesses held no right to inherit. The princess added that Duke Icarus would stop at nothing to win. She thought that declaring her love for the Viscount was her only choice. The maid begged her to maintain her royal dignity at any cost. Ailey grew indignant, asking how long she was expected to suffer in silence. She declared that the weight of the pressure was becoming unbearable. The maid tried to soothe her, acknowledging the pain in her eyes. She warned that an outburst would turn the entire kingdom upside down. Ailey brushed past her, feeling as though her world were already collapsing. The door to the chamber swung open with a sudden, sharp creak. The maid froze, caught in the threshold of the royal room. Viscount Blizzard stood in the corridor, watching the scene unfold. He asked the maid if she had been eavesdropping outside the door. He demanded to know exactly whose spy she was working for. The maid stammered that she was merely cleaning the floor nearby. Ailey turned to the Viscount and asked why he had appeared there. Blizzard explained that he arrived because he feared for her safety. He pointed to the maid, noting her suspicious behavior near the room. Isla asked the maid if the Viscount was speaking the truth. The servant repeated her claim that she was only performing her duties. The princess remarked that she had never seen this servant before. She asked how the woman knew where the royal chambers were located. The maid apologized, claiming it was her first day in this wing. She insisted she was unfamiliar with the layout and had lost her way. Isla ordered the maid to leave and never return to her presence. She warned that the next transgression would not be forgiven so easily. The maid bowed, promising to stay far away from the chambers. Ailey told her attendant to keep a close watch on the suspicious servant. Blizzard asked if she truly intended to let the woman go so easily. The princess replied that there was no reason to punish her yet. She wanted to discover who was pulling the strings behind the infiltration. Blizzard asked if she had any specific suspects in mind. Ailey named Duke Icarus, noting his reach into every corner of the palace. She explained that most of the staff had been bribed by his gold. The Viscount realized the royal family's power was weaker than he believed. He asked the princess what she intended to do to stop the marriage. Isla feared that if things continued, she would be forced to marry Justin. Blizzard told her to leave the Duke's schemes to him. He promised he would speak to His Majesty personally. The Viscount claimed he had an idea to shift the king's perspective. Outside, a squad of knights scoured the estate grounds with torches. The commander ordered his men to search every corner of the property. Daphne hid behind a stone pillar, holding her breath in the shadows. The soldiers passed by, completely unaware of her presence. Jerome waited for the fugitive at the appointed meeting spot. He thought of the princess's tearful eyes and began to lose hope. The heavy door swung open and Daphne appeared on the threshold. She asked how long he had been waiting in the dark. Jerome looked out the window and saw the knights searching the building. He realized they were scouring every room for the runaway royal. Daphne asked anxiously what they should do to escape the trap. She feared they would surely be caught by the approaching soldiers. Jerome blocked the door, but the princess said it would not stop them. He told her he had expected this and produced a secret scroll. the knights hammered on the wood, demanding entry into the room. They assumed the runaway princess was hiding inside the chamber. Jerome told the princess to hold on tight to his arm. He unrolled the scroll and began to read the ancient spell aloud. Magical energy swirled, and the two figures vanished from the room. Duke Icarus stood before the council and praised Blizzard's martial skill. He noted that Lord Logan Pass was injured, leaving a vacancy. The Duke offered the position of deputy head of the Phoenix Order. The room fell silent, as the Phoenix Order was the kingdom's elite. It was the strongest knightly order, commanded by Count Toriel. Candidates were accepted based on merit, regardless of their title. Blizzard understood that Icarus rarely offered such power without a trap. The Viscount smiled and thanked the Duke for the honor. He claimed he was far from perfect but would serve the kingdom. Icarus praised the Viscount for his display of modesty. The Duke then shifted his tone to discuss rumors circulating in the castle. The king asked the Duke to explain the nature of these rumors. Icarus claimed that someone saw Eiley and Blizzard leaving a barn together. The king's face flushed with a deep, dangerous shade of red. Blizzard remembered the night he carried the princess from the cold barn. The king demanded to know if the scandalous report was true. Blizzard looked at the monarch and confirmed that the event happened. A murmur of indignation spread through the noblemen in the hall. His Majesty demanded an immediate explanation for the late-night meeting. Blizzard explained that the princess was locked in while checking an egg. He stated that he had simply rescued her from the freezing air. Duke Icarus asked who could provide a witness to this tale. He added that witnesses saw them embracing in the shadows of the barn. Blizzard told the Duke to stop insulting the princess and his honor. He insisted that nothing improper had occurred between them that day. Icarus smirked, saying words were not enough to clear such a scandal. He warned that if the story spread, the princess's chastity would be ruined. The king slammed his fist on the table and adjourned the meeting. As he exited, the Duke stared at Blizzard with a predatory gaze. Princess Eiley fell asleep and found herself in a nightmare. She saw a crowd of people mocking a girl who abandoned her parents. They claimed the girl had gone to live with the barbarians. The crowd said she lacked dignity and had dishonored her family. Eiley realized with horror that the people were talking about her. They pointed at her, whispering about the night in the barn. The princess covered her face, crying that nothing happened with Blizzard. The crowd reached out, their hands grabbing at her clothes. She screamed for them to let her go, but they only grew louder. The princess woke up in her bed, drenched in a cold sweat. A carriage stopped at the castle porch as guests began to arrive. They stared at the building, wondering if it was truly Blizzard's mansion. The structure had once belonged to the wealthy Crimmer family. They whispered that the king must have granted it to the Viscount. Blizzard appeared at the door, dressed in formal noble attire. The hall fell silent as the guests turned to look at the newcomer. The Viscount thanked the distinguished guests for traveling so far. He announced that the reception celebrated his new title and council seat. Blizzard stood tall as the deputy head of the Phoenix Knight Order. The guests gasped, finally realizing the extent of his rising power. The guests marveled at the opulence of the mansion. They whispered among themselves about how a former commoner could amass such wealth. Blizzard watched the crowd, satisfied that Edmund had executed his orders perfectly. He knew that to overcome Icarus's influence, he had to flaunt superior financial power. Wealth and authority were the only languages these aristocrats understood. The guests approached the host, offering their gratitude for the lavish reception. Blizzard maintained a polite, hospitable smile as he accepted their praise. Lord Rowan stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room with a suspicious glint. He asked the host why the princess was nowhere to be seen this evening. Blizzard calmly explained that the princess remained in her chambers due to poor health. Rowan pressed further, questioning the nature of the rumors surrounding their relationship. He asked the Viscount if the scandalous reports of their late-night meeting were true. A nearby guest slammed his glass down, interrupting Rowan's insolent questioning. The guest warned Rowan that insulting the princess was a direct mockery of the royal family. He noted that if such drivel reached the king's ears, the consequences would be severe. Rowan paled, his confidence crumbling under the weight of the sudden accusation. The guest advised Rowan to focus his attention on the mismanagement of his own territories. Rowan retreated into the shadows, avoiding further eye contact with the crowd. The guest turned to Blizzard, noting that some lords grew arrogant after gaining the Duke's favor. Blizzard thanked Baron Vincent for his timely intervention. He admitted that without the Baron's help, his temper might have gotten the better of him. Baron Vincent laughed heartily, dismissing the incident as an amusing distraction. The Baron insisted that any loyal subject would defend the princess against such base insults. Blizzard shifted the topic, asking if there was trouble brewing in the Baron's lands. Vincent sighed, revealing that monster attacks had plagued his domain for several months. Despite reinforced fences and constant patrols, the death toll continued to rise. The Baron admitted that he felt a deep sense of guilt toward his suffering subjects. Blizzard asked if the Baron had formally requested aid from the authorities. Vincent replied that even the royal army had failed to contain the growing threat. He lamented that he was forced to solve the crisis with his own limited resources. Blizzard declared that his first official act as deputy head of the Phoenix Order would be to help. He promised to lead a campaign to suppress the monsters within the Baron's territory. The protagonist decided to provide this aid without seeking any personal profit. He intended to use the resources of the Phoenix Order to secure the small domain. Baron Vincent bowed deeply, expressing his profound gratitude for the unexpected support. Blizzard noted that the Baron's own kindness had earned this mobilization of the knights. He excused himself, claiming he had urgent business to attend to before the campaign began. The protagonist slipped away from the party and retreated into a secluded corner. He pulled a communication stone from his robes and activated the connection. Jerome's voice crackled through the stone, reporting that the target had been apprehended. Blizzard confirmed that the captive was indeed the eldest son of the slave family. He asked for the current location of the assassin known as Killer. Jerome replied that the captive was being held in the basement of the back annex. Blizzard descended into the cold, dark depths of the mansion's underbelly. He found Miller standing guard over a man bound tightly in heavy chains. A thick bag covered the prisoner's head, obscuring his identity from view. The Viscount reached out and ripped the hood away, revealing the captive's face. Miller explained that he had used a specialized technique to paralyze the assassin's pressure points. He confirmed that the self-destruct poison hidden in the man's molar had been removed. Blizzard focused his gaze on the prisoner, activating his unique soul manipulation abilities. He began to probe the villain's mind, extracting vital information while suppressing his will. The assassin slumped forward, his eyes glazing over as he fell under the Viscount's control. Killer knelt on the cold stone floor, asking his master for his next command. Miller watched in awe, asking how the Viscount had performed such a feat. Blizzard ordered the assassin to reveal his true name and the source of his orders. The man spoke in a monotone voice, identifying himself as Sis. He confessed that Duke Icarus had ordered the destruction of John's slave. Blizzard commanded Sis to return to Icarus and report that the mission was successful. He instructed the puppet to provide daily updates on every move the Duke made. Sis bowed low, confirming that he understood and would obey his master's orders. Miller asked if this was the forbidden art of mind control. Blizzard corrected him, identifying the technique as a fragment of soul-absorbing magic. Miller asked to be trained in the art, but the Viscount flatly refused. He warned that the method was a dangerous brainwashing tool favored by fanatical cults. Blizzard explained that the technique only worked if the caster's power vastly eclipsed the victim's. He told Miller that there were few targets worth the effort of such a binding. The protagonist turned away, knowing it was finally time to strike back at Icarus. Sis returned to the Duke's estate to deliver his fabricated report. Icarus sat on his throne, asking if the task had been completed properly. The assassin confirmed that the slave had been dealt with as instructed. The Duke nodded, signaling for Sis to depart, but stopped him at the last second. He signaled Cursonen to verify that the mental seal remained intact. Cursonen scanned the assassin and confirmed that the spell was still active. The Duke leaned back, convinced that his plans were proceeding without a hitch. He whispered to himself that it was finally time to settle the score with Blizzard. The next day, news of the slave's death spread like wildfire through the capital. The official report claimed the man had suffered a fatal fall from his horse. The public accepted the tragic news, though many noted the suspicious timing. Rumors swirled through the markets, but the truth remained hidden from the masses. Miller remarked that the capital was now descending into the chaos they had orchestrated. Blizzard agreed, noting that the only obstacle to his plans had been cleared. Most nobles assumed that Duke Icarus had successfully eliminated the threat. Miller asked why they did not reveal the truth and arrest the Duke immediately. He pointed out that the evidence against Icarus was already quite overwhelming. Blizzard explained that they could not afford to rush against such a suspicious opponent. He insisted that they needed to prepare their trap with absolute precision. The Viscount added that there was a strategic reason for their current silence. The rumors about the princess had been eclipsed by the news of the slave's death. He noted that one fire was best extinguished by lighting a much larger one. Icarus had now become the primary subject of public condemnation and suspicion. Miller remained focused on the immediate tactical move, while Blizzard looked toward the horizon. The duo arrived at the modest residence of the former deputy head of the Phoenix Order. Miller looked at the small, run-down house and expressed his confusion. He asked if this was truly the man who had lost his position after an injury. Blizzard confirmed the identity, noting the man's fall from grace had been swift. Miller found it strange that a high-ranking knight would live in such poverty. The Viscount explained that the man had been accused of insubordination and exiled. He had allegedly attacked his superior immediately after breaking his leg. Miller scanned the area, noting that the field in front of the house was suspiciously clean. He remarked that it looked as if no one had lived there for years. Blizzard noted that Miller, an expert assassin, also knew how to leave no traces. Miller objected, pointing out that even a wounded man would leave some sign of passage. The Viscount asked with a smirk if Miller suspected the man moved through the air. Suddenly, a sharp whistle pierced the air as an arrow flew toward them. Miller and Blizzard dove to the side just as the projectile struck the ground. The arrow hummed with a violent, concentrated burst of magical energy. Blizzard examined the shaft and was shocked to see it was fashioned from a feather. He looked up to the roof and spotted a bird-like creature watching them. The creature spoke, labeling the visitors as dirty intruders. Miller asked if the Viscount had known about the beastmen living there. Blizzard admitted he had been caught off guard by the revelation. He had never imagined that Logan was actually a half-human hybrid. Logan spotted the emblem on the Viscount's chest and recognized the rank. He asked if the man had come on orders to finish him off. Miller realized the hybrid had misunderstood their intentions and tried to speak. Blizzard silenced him, curious to see how the beastmen would react to the pressure. He asked Logan what would happen if the order to kill him were actually true. Miller panicked, wondering why his lord would provoke such a dangerous creature. Blizzard whispered that he was merely testing the man's true combat strength. Logan roared in anger, declaring that he would destroy the intruder where he stood. He took to the air, his wings beating rhythmically as he prepared another volley. Blizzard ordered Miller to retreat to a safe distance immediately. The protagonist drew his ice sword, the blade glowing with a frigid, lethal light. He planned to strip the hybrid of his feathers before closing in for the finish. Miller warned that the feathers of a beastman were incredibly elastic and tough. The first arrow struck the sword, bouncing off the blade with a loud clang. Blizzard dodged the next projectile, his movements fluid and precise. Logan laughed, announcing that he would release 2 feathers at once to overwhelm him. The Viscount countered that he would simply deflect the barrage with his steel. The battle intensified as feathers rained down like a storm of razor blades. Blizzard heard 2 distinct sounds of firing but could only see 1 feather in flight. He realized the hybrid was utilizing a complex, layered attack strategy. At the final moment, the Viscount turned and caught the hidden projectile with his bare hand. He realized the hybrid possessed weapons that his sword could not easily shatter. Blizzard noted that Logan possessed a level of security that matched his reputation. Logan hovered in the sky, indignant that a human dared to evaluate his worth. The beastman gathered his strength, preparing to unleash his full power. Viscount Blizzard ascended into the air with silent, graceful movements. He hovered directly above the hybrid, his shadow falling over the clearing. The beastman Logan struggled to maintain his balance on the ground. Blizzard declared that the time had come to establish true authority. The Viscount unleashed a technique of light steps to maneuver through the sky. Logan tried to aim his bow, but the aerial assault threw him off. The hybrid stumbled, his stance shattered by the overwhelming pressure from above. Blizzard noted with cold detachment that the beastman had lost his weapon. Logan crashed heavily onto the dirt, his body sliding across the grass. The Viscount descended, landing softly beside his fallen adversary. He reached down and pressed his fingers against the hybrid's mangled leg. Logan recoiled in pain, cursing the man as a dishonorable scoundrel. He shouted at the intruder, demanding to know why he targeted a wounded man. Blizzard ignored the insult and struck the injured limb with a precise punch. Logan gritted his teeth, his scream echoing through the quiet forest. The Viscount delivered another heavy blow to the same spot. Logan's leg began to shift, the bone and muscle undergoing a visible transformation. The beastman yelled for the man to cease his assault immediately. In a fit of desperation, Logan launched a powerful kick at the Viscount. Blizzard blocked the strike with ease, his arm remaining perfectly steady. Logan froze, his eyes widening as he realized his leg felt entirely different. He tentatively tested his weight, finding the chronic pain had vanished. The hybrid stared at his limb in confusion, unable to comprehend the sudden healing. Blizzard explained that no local doctor could have mended that particular wound. He clarified that the leg had not been broken, but cursed by dark forces. The Viscount revealed that he had purged the chaos mana with his own energy. Logan stood tall, his gaze fixed on the man who had performed the miracle. He demanded to know the true identity of his mysterious benefactor. Blizzard replied that he was simply the one who would teach Logan to trust again. The hybrid gestured toward his small home, inviting the guests inside. He placed a roasted wild boar carcass onto the wooden table as a gesture of peace. Miller moved to grab a piece of the meal, his stomach growling in hunger. Logan slapped his hand away, insisting the food was reserved only for his savior. Blizzard interjected, stating that his companion was under his protection and required sustenance. Logan grunted in annoyance, tossing a dead mouse toward Miller's feet. The Viscount took a bite of the roast, noting the flavor was surprisingly refined. Miller sighed, picking up the small rodent while grumbling about the unfair treatment. Blizzard turned his attention back to Logan, asking how the injury had originally occurred. He mentioned the rumors blaming Toriel, the captain of the Phoenix Knights, for the betrayal. Logan sat in silence for a moment before deciding to recount the tragic history. He explained how Toriel had summoned him to a private office upon his appointment. The captain had acted with fake warmth, masking his deep-seated racism toward hybrids. Toriel had proposed a dark alliance, demanding Logan's total submission to a treasonous plot. The hybrid had rejected the proposal, finding the request both insulting and absurd. Toriel warned him that leaving the room meant there would be no turning back. The captain then channeled his unique energy, blasting Logan's leg with a surge of power. Logan remembered waking up in a hospital bed, the reality of his injury finally sinking in. He finished his story, the weight of the past lingering in the small room. The beastman bowed low, thanking the Viscount for the restoration of his pride. He insisted that they find the one responsible for casting the wicked curse. Blizzard shook his head, stating that he already knew the identity of the culprit. Miller asked how the Viscount could possibly be aware of such a hidden secret. The nobleman replied that the signature of the energy matched a previous encounter. He reminded Miller of the assassin who had targeted John's slave in the capital. The pieces fell into place, pointing toward the involvement of Duke Icarus. Logan grew visibly alarmed, his body tensing at the mention of the Duke's name. He confirmed that the treasonous proposal he had rejected was tied directly to Icarus. The plot aimed to overthrow the ruler and place the Duke upon the throne. Blizzard smiled, realizing the trap he had been setting was finally closing. Inside a grand estate, Duke Icarus stood before his guest with a triumphant grin. He asked about the status of Commander Toriel's healing wounds. The commander replied that he was recovering, though his movements remained stiff. Icarus reminded him that the troublesome Viscount had recently joined their ranks. He ordered Toriel to bring the man to him, promising a promotion to the rank of Duke. Toriel knelt on the floor, swearing to carry out the order without hesitation. Icarus watched him leave, imagining the location would soon become Blizzard's final grave. At a rural outpost, a bloodied man lay on the ground near the Viscount. Toriel approached the scene, questioning what the deputy was doing in such a place. Baron Vincent arrived, thanking Blizzard for his timely intervention in the territory. The Viscount brushed aside the praise, noting he had been delayed by urgent matters. He confirmed that he had deployed the Phoenix Knights to extinguish the recent fires. Blizzard looked at the Baron, noting the man's face was etched with deep anxiety. Vincent whispered that he had vital information regarding the corruption within the Phoenix Order. He described multiple incidents of senseless violence carried out by the Knights. Blizzard charged into the barracks, his eyes scanning the room for signs of abuse. He found the Knights surrounding a group of beastmen, beating them without mercy. The Viscount moved like a blur, striking the lead Knight to the floor. He deactivated the other attackers with swift, precise blows to their pressure points. Blizzard knelt beside a wounded owlman, checking the severity of his injuries. The Knights stood in confusion, unable to process the deputy commander's sudden rebellion. Blizzard glared at the group, his presence radiating a cold, intimidating authority. He knocked Commander Butler aside, clearing a path to reach the bleeding victim. Toriel stepped into the room, his expression twisting into a mask of pure rage. He demanded to know why the deputy was interfering with the Order's discipline. The commander pointed to his own scarred eye, blaming the beastman for his suffering. He ordered Blizzard to hand over the owlman for immediate punishment. The Viscount pulled the beastman to his feet, shielding him from further harm. He warned Toriel that any attempt to punish him would expose the plot with Icarus. The commander froze, his face pale as he wondered how his secret was discovered. Blizzard told the knights to cease their torment if they valued their own lives. The owlman looked at the Viscount, asking why a high-ranking human would help him. Blizzard replied that he understood the sting of being labeled a barbarian. He confessed that he had faced similar discrimination in his own homeland. The beastman realized the deputy was fighting for a future beyond simple violence. Blizzard reached out his hand, offering his full support to the oppressed. The following evening, the knights gathered in a dark, secluded corner of the camp. One knight complained about the public humiliation he suffered at the deputy's hands. He urged Toriel to take action, claiming they could no longer tolerate such interference. Toriel agreed, deciding it was time to stop hiding his true intentions. He pointed to a dangerous location on the map, ordering the squad to lure Blizzard there. The knights obeyed, traveling toward a wilderness infested with bloodthirsty monsters. Blizzard followed the squad, sensing the shift in the atmosphere as they entered the woods. He detected a strange, artificial energy lingering in the dense mountain air. Toriel halted the group, claiming they had spotted a massive horde of monsters. He turned to the Viscount, challenging him to demonstrate his legendary swordsmanship. Blizzard refused the invitation, his suspicions about the Duke's trap growing stronger. The knight who had been beaten earlier drew his blade, eager for a chance at revenge. He stepped forward, announcing he would show the deputy how a true warrior fought. The knight drove his dagger deep into the monster's flesh. A spray of dark blood coated the forest floor. The beast collapsed, its limbs twitching in the dirt. Commander Toriel watched the scene, his face pale with sudden terror. The fallen creature's jaws snapped shut around the knight's throat. Blizzard stared at the grisly sight, his brow furrowed in concentration. The severed monster parts began to knit themselves back together. He identified the creature as a Zhong-Shur, a jumping vampire. Toriel gasped, shaking his head in disbelief at the rising undead. Blizzard noted that Duke Icarus had sacrificed his own order as bait. The commander turned on his heel, abandoning his subordinates to the slaughter. Blizzard lunged forward, blocking the commander's path of retreat. He questioned how a man of such rank could desert his own men. The Viscount realized he still lacked the evidence to expose the Duke. He needed the commander alive to uncover the truth. A massive, hulking monster lunged from the shadows toward the Viscount. Blizzard braced himself, recognizing the strength of his new opponent. Nearby, a wounded knight clutched his side, gasping for air. A vial of green liquid was pressed into his trembling hand. He downed the restorative elixir, feeling the warmth of recovery. The knight looked up, expecting to see his commander standing over him. Instead, he met the steady gaze of the injured owlman. The owlman gestured toward the distant, fleeing figure of Toriel. He urged the knight to rise and rejoin the desperate fray. The knight hesitated, confused by the kindness of a former enemy. The owlman simply called him a comrade, offering no further explanation. The knight gripped his sword, his resolve hardening into iron. He vowed to survive and atone for his past cruelty. Blizzard focused his energy on the boss monster's relentless assault. He realized the beast thrived on constant regeneration. The Viscount channeled his frost, freezing the creature's limbs in place. The frozen flesh shattered, halting the monster's ability to heal. Ice proved to be the absolute weakness of the undead horde. Baron Vincent and his reinforcements burst into the clearing. The Baron shouted for his men to hold the line at all costs. They arrived to find only silent, frozen statues of monsters. Vincent looked at the Viscount, his hands trembling with profound awe. Rumors quickly spread of the king who could freeze death itself. In the capital, Toriel summoned the commanders of the other knightly orders. Gordon of the Storm Order and Robert of the Titans arrived. Toriel claimed that Icarus was a scoundrel who had betrayed them all. He feigned regret, attempting to pull the others into his web. Gordon pledged his loyalty, promising to follow the Viscount's lead. Robert remained silent, a staunch royalist loyal to the crown. Toriel hinted at a coming rebellion to overthrow the current dynasty. He warned Robert that the king's power was a hollow shell. Robert stood his ground, declaring his unwavering allegiance to the throne. He gave the traitors until dawn to surrender their forces. A woman materialized from a spilled puddle of wine. Lady Cursonen stepped into the light, her eyes cold and predatory. Toriel knelt in the dirt, begging for one final chance to succeed. Gordon realized they were in the presence of a powerful black mage. Cursonen dismissed the commander, declaring his usefulness at an end. She contacted Icarus, who ordered the immediate elimination of Baron Robert. The Duke viewed the Viscount as his only true rival for the throne. He decided the moment for his final strike had finally arrived. In the forest, the repentant knight stood alongside the owlman. They fought side by side, united by a new, lifelong connection. Blizzard watched them, finally grasping the dream of a peaceful future. His scout, Short, appeared with a grim report from the shadows. The rebellion had officially begun across the kingdom's borders. Baron Robert sat in his office, preparing his defenses for the morning. The door creaked open, revealing Toriel and Gordon standing in the gloom. They moved with unnatural, jerky motions, their skin turning gray. Robert reached for his blade, but the undead commanders lunged forward. Cursonen emerged from the darkness, watching the slaughter with a smirk. She commanded the undead to finish the wounded commander. Far away, Blizzard received the urgent news of the capital's fall. He ordered his wyvern, Lilith, to prepare for immediate departure. The path to the capital was paved with the bones of the fallen. He had to reach Escold before the Duke burned the kingdom to ash. The Viscount looked toward the horizon, his eyes burning with cold intent.